We'll call the public hearing for Monday, March 24th, 2014 to order. The public hearing, the subject this evening is the zoning amendment bylaw number 3344, 2014. Mr. Krekic, would you please come forward and provide your report on the effect of this bylaw should the bylaw get adopted? Good evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay. So the subject property is located at the end of Graham Avenue.
I'd ask you, Mr. Krekic, to speak directly into the mic so people at home can hear you.
Certainly, Your Worship. The subject property is located at the end of Graham Avenue, as highlighted with the red lines. It is zoned R2. The applicant worked with the staff for months before applying in February. Just a short brief on the process. Following the first reading, staff commenced with referrals. Following the second reading, staff commenced public notification process. Referrals did not identify any issues, and inquiries resulting from public notifications include, I'm going to have to speak from my memory, Your Worship. I think I lost my
Mr. Long, can we trust Mr. Krekic's memory?
Certainly. Yeah, that's one of them. We've had an inquiry from...
This is a written inquiry?
This is a written... We had two verbal inquiries. One from anonymous individual who noted displeasure about this project and increase in traffic. One from Mr. Reimer, who is an absentee property owner on Van Adderstal, who was inquiring about the height of the buildings. I supplied them with information, and he was satisfied. And then one from Barbara and Paddy Green, who identified a number of reasons. Number one being insufficient water pressure. Number two being we have been told that the sewer is maxed out. Number three being road safety and narrow sidewalks. And number four being changing R1 to RM2 is not compatible with the neighborhood. I did consult with the engineering department, and we do have sufficient water pressure, and we do have sufficient sewer capacity in the neighborhood. With respect to roads, Your Worship, they are in a similar capacity and nature as in the remaining parts of the city of Prince Rupert. And in fact, that road system was designed to support the extension of Alpine Drive, which would add probably close to 40 or 50 housing units. The site has challenges and opportunities. The challenge is the steep slopes, construction costs that are associated with the steep slopes, geotechnical matters that need to be considered, drainage matters that have to be considered. On the flip side, the opportunities, of course, are views, which is a big part of the quality of life in the city of Prince Rupert. The proposed development will be providing desirable type of housing, and it's sensitive to the neighborhoods in terms of the massing. The applicant still needs to apply for subdivision and building permit, both of which will test the details of servicing and construction standards. But for now, it suffices to note that the 11 units will be 1 and 2 bedroom strata condominiums with construction standards sensitive to disabilities. This public hearing is concerned with land use. Quality of life official community plan is encouraging densification. The increase in density is sensitive to the neighborhood, and the market appears to be demanding this type of housing. In conclusion, staff supports the proposed development.
Thank you very much. I'll ask council members if there's any questions of Mr. Krekic. Councillor Cunningham.
I've had feedback from some of the residents in the area on Atlan, more than Graham, that the water pressure is not significant. They have trouble with showering sometimes. And how old is the infrastructure at that end of Graham and Atlan?
I'm not sure of the age of the infrastructure, but as I said, I did check with the engineering department, and they are satisfied that the water capacity is adequate.
Well, they're not the ones having the showers, the residents are. So it's an answer that I would, is there any plans for upgrading the water system or sewer system in that area in the next little while?
Not to my knowledge.
Mr. Long?
Not to my knowledge.
And also another concern, and I think it's a concern all around town, is that they find the internet in that end of town is very, very slow, and they're wondering with an added group of people if that would be improved or decrease in service.
I'm not an expert in technology.
That would be a question for the internet provider. Any further questions? Councillor Ashley.
I'm not sure which of staff would answer this, but I'm just looking for a ballpark. If this proposed development goes forward, do we know approximately the amount of taxation, new taxation, that would bring in for the city?
Mrs. Bombin, any idea?
I'm sorry, what was the value of the property?
The amount of taxation that would be generated as a result of this project and its new construction.
Well, it would depend on the value of the new construction.
Mr. Krekic, have you got any idea of the value of the construction?
At this time, we're talking with the land use, Your Worship. The details of construction are still not clear. I do understand that it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $5 million, but that's very much a ballpark figure.
Sure. Thank you. We'll split it up the middle and call it $4 million. Have you got any ideas? Any further questions while we're waiting for that? Councillor Garon.
I'll just make a comment about the water. I know in the 60s or 70s the water pressure was really bad out there because it was hooked up to the cannery and the ferries down below, and I know at one point it was fixed so that it wasn't combined with that system. So, and at that point in time, if the ferry and the cannery was running, there was no water. So that's the only information I can kind of put out there.
Thank you. Mrs. Bombin.
With a value of $4 million, the taxes would be approximately $36,000.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Krekic? Councillor Thorkelson.
Well, I don't really like the idea that the public is telling us that our infrastructure is so poor that they are having problems at present with having enough water for showering, and the water pressure is varying. And I don't know how to even if this project goes ahead or not goes ahead, Your Worship, I have concerns that people believe that the sewer isn't sufficient for that area, or at least is at capacity, because I heard that during the last discussion that we had about the section of the Westview Park that we were looking at thinking about putting condos on. And so if there are water problems and sewer capacity problems, we need to be certain of this, and people, if residents are telling us that there are problems, then how can we resolve this issue? Can we get some water testing for pressure testing? I mean, we must be able to do that at fire hydrants or something.
We could check with the sewer and water department to see if there's been any complaints, any inquiries, to see if they've done any testing.
Could we ask them to do some testing? Because I like to, make sure. I mean, I think that's it is a real concern. It's a concern from a fire point of view, as well as a concern about just daily use. Certainly, we should be we should be ensuring that people who live up in that section of town have sufficient water to have a shower without having, I mean, if it's an issue with one resident and it's a residential issue, which is different than being a city issue and not having enough water pressure. And I would be very concerned about that. And so if we can make sure that that we do some testing on both the sewer and water before, you know, and to make sure that it's satisfactory, at least for the present residents, and then to make a determination of whether there is that we can handle a new development plus the development up down Alpine and any of those other.
Well, there are some infrastructure costs involved, but you can certainly boost the water pressure. Mr. Long, would you have the Utilities Department look into this? We have the Fire Chief over there waiting in the wings. Mr. Fire Chief, good evening. You ever had any problem with water pressure up there with your equipment? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Krekic. Appreciate your information. Just before we ask the public to provide comments, I'll review the public hearing procedure. The public hearing is organized according to Section 890 of the Local Government Act. Tonight's public hearing involves the zoning amendment bylaw number 3344, 2014. The intent of the bylaw, as stated by the planner, is to increase density. Everyone present who believes that their interest is affected by the proposed bylaw shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. None of you will be discouraged or prevented from making your views known. However, it is important to restrict your remarks to matters contained in the proposed bylaw. A person may make their statement in writing as outlined in the public notice, and if received by the deadline, their presentation will be read by staff at the public hearing. Of course, that's already been done. If a person wishes to make a presentation at the public hearing, they are welcome to do so, provided the following criteria is followed. This is necessary in order to allow for the recording of the public hearing process. The chairman will recognize only those individuals who present themselves at the table and speak into the microphone. Prior to speaking, please provide your full name and be prepared to spell your surname for the corporate administrator. Please also provide your residential or business address. Should you wish to read from a prepared statement, the city would appreciate receiving a copy for reference purposes by the corporate administrator. Members of council may, if they so wish, ask questions of you following your presentation. Please note that this is not a question period at which a debate takes place. City Council will not provide any comments on issues raised, but will be in attendance to listen to the comments presented. Should no additional speakers present themselves, the Chair will call 3 times for anyone else to speak to the matter. And if no one else comes forward, the public hearing will be adjourned. After the public hearing has adjourned, the Council may, without further notice, give whatever effect Council believes proper to the representations made at this hearing. So I'll ask for the first time. Anybody who deems their property affected by this proposed bylaw, and of course the project that you've seen outlined here, is now certainly welcome to come forward and speak. Thank you very much. Good evening. When you sit down there, if you could press the mic, there will be grayish green to your eye. Speak directly into it. You're on television, and that allows people to hear you.
Thank you. My name is Helen Moore, last name M-O-O-R-E, and I live at 2200 Graham Avenue. Just wanted to make a few comments. The first one was that we had received something in the mail, as well as we saw the article in the March 19th paper. Therefore, we have not had much response time, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, Your Worship, and councillors. I've spoken with 6 families, some of whom grew up in Prince Rupert and some of whom come here from other communities. There is a mixed reaction, but many are trying to be objective. Actually, everybody's trying to be objective and to see both sides of the coin. I noticed that it is a proposed construction, and so I understand that similar proposals for Graham Avenue have been shut down in the past there. I don't know if that's continued or not, but that is something that I have heard. There are several parts that I was interested in. The densification, I think that is something that many people agree with. Diversification and aging in place also all have merit if they're done appropriately. The major concerns that most people had were traffic. That is already a problem in that area. Another concern was the zoning. I understand that it is R2, and I'm not exactly sure if that means that this area is single family zoning or if that means it's something else. Another concern is what are the ramifications for the other lots if this goes ahead? For example, the other side of the cul-de-sac. If the view side of the Graham Avenue is developed, would the other side of the cul-de-sac also be developed as well? Which would, of course, increase traffic. Transportation is a major issue down there already. With buses, would there be a bus stop further down the residential street, or would seniors have to walk up the street towards the bus stop? I understand that there will be 11 units. Will there be anything for visitor parking? That was seen as a major concern. One of the families I spoke with had grown up in a cul-de-sac where there had been some development in that area, and she said that there had been a multiplication factor, which means if one person moves in there, for example, a grandparent, all the grandchildren and the children are also coming there as well. So it's not just the one person who's coming down the street, but the multiplication factor of the people who are living there. Okay. If the proposal were to go ahead, traffic is definitely by far the #1 issue. Some ideas that people came up with were proposing a 30-kilometer zone and signs. Some suggested stop signs, for example, at 17th Avenue and Van Arsdale going up, or some speed bumps as well. Again, traffic is already a very serious concern there. There are already lots of Sunday drivers and pleasure drivers and residents coming down there who already speed. I know that there was one parent who was concerned already that her child basically had to run across the street because of traffic concerns, and she was very worried that her child might be run down by other people. So if there are more people coming, that would be a concern. Water and sewer have already been noted as a potential problem. Another concern was that, or some suggestion was that downtown seemed a potential location as well for something like this proposal. There's lots of abandoned lots already downtown, and many people might be interested in being closer to the core, for example, being able to walk to Tim Hortons or various places to meet up with their buddies. So there were people that I spoke with were not necessarily against it, were interested in hearing more about it, but definitely had some concerns. And if the proposal did go through, either city or the proposed developer should be called to task to make sure that the traffic concerns are addressed as well as some of the other concerns.
Certainly. Thank you for your comments. Just stay right there in case council members have some questions. You had a list there. The proponent is in the audience here. Hopefully he caught some of your concerns. And he, of course, along with anybody else who deems property affected, will be able to come forward and perhaps answer some of your questions.
Thank you.
Councillor Ashley.
Thank you for coming forward. My question actually is to do with yours, but it's more for staff. What I'm wondering is some of the ideas, if this was to go ahead, some of the ideas for mitigating traffic, like the zones for 30 kilometers, signs, and possibly speed bumps. Are those things that would be, or potentially would be paid by the developer? I'm just asking staff if that's how it normally works, or is that something that the city would be doing?
Things of that nature is responsibility of city, primarily engineering department, and so they will look at that. Of course, we are making notes of all these, and they will look at and they have their specifications and such.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Cunningham.
I like your suggestion of the speed limit and the speed bumps if the project goes ahead. I almost hit a child on Graham Avenue years ago that came out between two parked cars. And but are you suggesting, I can't see that being a problem from Vernarsdale down, but more so up on this end?
I think more the ridge coming up to Graham Avenue is one potential area. 17th Avenue going up is another. And then we're pretty much right where Van Arsdale swoops up, and people drive down there like it's a highway sometimes. So if there were a stop sign there, that would mitigate some of the people going down that area. I know that one resident on my street nearly killed one of my children and I was telling him to slow down, and he was waving at me. He was thinking that I was waving at him, but I was telling him to slow down, not to kill my child. So that is a concern for sure.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thorkelson.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Ms. Moore, for taking an opportunity and doing a bit of a survey to let us know what people are thinking. Were people concerned about diversification, or were people concerned about the idea of diversification? Not of diversification, of
densification.
Densification. Thank you.
Sorry.
Or were they concerned that something like this, which is obviously going to be an expensive building that I think the developer is looking to have, it's going to really looking for older people who want to retire to that type of place. So are people concerned about the fact that there might be more apartments built in that area, or what was the concern about densification?
I think that people weren't concerned. Well, again, it's been such a short time that we've had to think about it, but I think that was one concern. I think that people realize that aging in place is a wonderful thing, and that sometimes neighborhoods have cycles, and that people want to move in and out of them. Young families as well was cited as a possible person who would move into the development. So it may or may not all be seniors moving in there. So diversification was not necessarily cited as the only negative, and some people were very positive about that. They thought that was potentially a good thing for the neighborhood. So there's definitely pros and cons. I think one of the things was, how is it going to move forward in the best possible way, and if there are diversification and densification in Prince Rupert, could there not also be other areas looked at? For example, the vacant lot down here that's sort of a huge pit, or different places like that might be a better place for someone who has mobility issues to be able to get to places downtown. So there were pros and cons either way, but it was more, how is it going to be managed effectively for the community as well as the seniors.
Thank you. And if I'm quite sure that council would be pleased if we saw some more developers and more development downtown as well. So I think we'd share that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll ask again if there's anybody else who deems their property affected by the proposed development to please come forward. I'll call for a second time. If there's anyone who deems their property to be affected by the proposed development, to please come forward and speak. I'll call a third and final time. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. I'm Kevin Newton. My last name is Newton. And I hope I can answer some questions, but I can't answer things that are prevalent to the city's operations.
That's understood. Thank you.
What we're trying to do is develop let's start from the beginning. I'm handicapped with Parkinson's, and I looked at a piece of property away from the silos we have in front of my place. They're kind of noisy. There's all sorts of objections that I don't want to bring forward. But they affect my life, my way of living. So I looked at a piece of property down, and it was very hard to find a nice piece of property that overlooks the sea like I had before. Now I overlook the silos. So while I was looking at a piece of property to develop for future was this location at the very end of Graham, and it is a duplex type of property, which is what they call R2, and that shows that you can put two units on each of the properties of 100 by 50. And I wasn't really interested in that, but the cost of building on there is quite astronomical, that I ended up thinking, well, maybe it should go to duplex, and making it in that category. Meantime, I met Don, and Don said he owned the property next door, and said, well, let's put an idea together and put a project there for the people like myself to retire in a dignified way, where they can watch the sea and everything go on in the valley below us, and also have the facilities of a modern day house, which is handicapped capabilities. And this is where I came from, and so that's what started the program of putting this thing through with this project through with our architect and so on and so forth. I tell you, there's been a rough road, but it's still we're still looking at accommodating as much as we can without burying ourselves in cost to accommodate whatever that's required in the community. So if you have any questions, or the council has any questions, I hope I can answer them.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Newton, with regards to the traffic problem and that, with the parking, is there going to be ample parking for tenants and guests if they come?
There's 11.
I'll ask you, Mr. Newton, excuse me, to press the grayish-green button there. You could pull the mic down a little bit if it's more comfortable for you to also.
Maybe I should eat it. It makes it easier to communicate. I see now I can be heard. There's 13 covered parking lots in that area, off the road, so that there's no parking on the road for the people who own the apartments, the condominiums. Majority of the time, most people in that area, which is why we looked at putting parking as much as we could on private land. They park on the side of the road to visit their parents or grandparents, and it's just something that's part of that community. I'm not very happy with that, but that's what happens with in living on Graham Avenue. From the past, from the whole length of it, unless you have lived down where I live, and they have good parking area there.
Thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
Mr. Newton, in the picture here, I see the 13 parking stalls that are covered, and it appears that you could actually, if somebody's visiting, be parking and still almost be off the road if you were visiting behind the tenant's car that's there. Is the picture depicting it correctly, or is it just...
That is correct.
If you could hit the button again, please.
Okay, thank you. Let's try that. Yes, you're correct there, Councillor, that the vehicles are full length, pretty well full length off the property because of the easement, what do they call it, the frontage that's required. You have to be away from the road, so that could be made as a driveway in which you can park individuals' cars that are come and visit the individual that wishes to visit their friends or children or their grandparents.
Councillor Cunningham.
So in effect, you've almost got 22 parking places. You know, even though they're not official. Like if I come to visit my mother or grandmother or myself one day, I can park behind the tenant's car that's already there.
Very true. Further questions from members of council? Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Kevin, for coming forward. The traffic that people seem to think that would be causing problems in the neighborhood, it's my understanding that some of the people that probably would be purchasing these lots would be of your age, if not maybe younger, would probably be retired, probably want to go away for 2 or 3 months at a time. That's why they want to buy a condominium. So sometimes people won't even be living in their units. Would you anticipate that would be sort of what would happen? And my other question is,
let's do one question at a time.
As a senior, how often would you be driving your vehicle downtown? Like, would it be 4 times a day, once a day, during traffic when children are going to school, that type of thing?
Mr. Newton?
Well, I'll have to let you know that with Parkinson's, they kind of say you no longer can drive, so I can't drive, so I use other people to help me. So there'll be a taxi coming to pick me up, or people coming to pick me up, and that's my partner that will drive. But there aren't the most majority of seniors will just go to one place and stay there, because it's a chore trying to get up and get moving as we find out as we get older. Traveling backwards and forwards 4 or 5 times a day it would be a little bit much for a majority of seniors who are in the capacity area that I am in. It's just as you can see, I'm shaking right now, but that's because my pills haven't reacted. I take about 20 pills a day to survive. So what are you trying to do? I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. And I just spent a week down in Parksville at my parents' where they live on a retired, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Seniors living. Nobody's going faster than 20 and 30 miles an hour. I can assure you that if it is seniors living, that they're not speeding up and down the street. They probably are only going out once a day, if that, sometimes maybe once every 2 days. So if it is designated seniors, which I'm sure anybody can live there other than a senior, it wouldn't really be a problem for the traffic. That's the way I anticipate what your development would be for. So I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong, but I'm sure you can let me know about that.
Yes, Councillor. We're developing it so that the hallways are wheelchair capability. The doors are all wheelchaired. The bathrooms are all for wheelchairs. Everything is built in a somewhat opulent looking way, but so you don't look, you're not embarrassed that it looks like a hospital. We're looking at putting in 9-foot ceilings so that people can feel that it's not enclosed. And the older you get, you always want to feel the comforts that you wish you had when you were younger.
Thank you.
Councillor Ashley, then Councillor Kenny.
I just wanted to address one of the things that was said by Ms. Moore. And it's just a question for you, because I know when you presented to us at the last meeting, it was fairly clear that this was meant to be something for people that are either have some sort of handicap or senior. That was the intention of the project, and there was some concern that maybe younger families would be moving in there, which of course could add to traffic problems and things like that. So I'm just wondering if I could just get a brief description of exactly who it is that this project is designed for.
Right, Councillor, that we're looking at developing for people who are, as Don was saying, the executive single person or executive person. That's one of the ideas. It's his idea, but that's not what mine was. So as you can see, we have rumbles in the campsite. But the majority of the times, why it was developed and why we came about is to provide a accommodation for people like myself and people who want to buy for future for themselves, so that they don't have to continuously invest, because try and put a family into one-bedroom apartment is a little much. Or even a two-bedroom apartment, when one of the bedrooms are used as a hobby shop of one of the elders.
Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Newton. That explains the parking, etc., that I wanted to know, but I just wanted to tell Councillor Garon that not all of us seniors drive at 20 miles an hour.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Council, for listening to me.
I'll ask, is there anyone further who deems their property affected by this proposed bylaw wishes to come forward to speak? I'll ask for a second time. Is there anyone who wishes to come forward to speak who deems their property affected by this proposed bylaw? And I'll ask for a third and final time. Is there anyone who wishes to come forward to speak to this matter as they deem their property to be affected by this proposed bylaw? If not, I'll end the public hearing. We'll move on. I'll refer Council to the regular meeting of Council agenda for Monday, March 24th, 2014. And the first item is the call to order. There's a recommendation for Council's consideration that the regular meeting be suspended and the committee of the whole meeting be convened. I'll ask Council's consideration of that. Councillor Ashley. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Kinney, that the regular meeting be suspended and the committee of the whole meeting be convened. I'll ask Council's consideration of the matter. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is passed. I'll refer Council to the committee of the whole meeting agenda. The first item there is the adoption of the agenda. And the recommendation reads that the agenda for the committee of the whole meeting of March 24th, 2014 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. And now we have the question period from the public. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to come forward and ask a question about the city's operations? Yes, please come forward.
Hello, Your Worship.
Good evening.
Can I sit here?
Certainly. It's better if you sit adjacent the mic, though,
okay,
so that people that...
sit here,
yes, please.
Okay.
That way people that are watching on television
I
can...
want them to be seen. I like to see the home viewers see me at home.
They will if you sit there.
Okay. Your Worship, can I get a glass of water?
Certainly.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Good evening. Your question concerning the city's operations are?
We're on public statements, are we correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, yeah. Your Worship, my name is Shelley Starr. I'll spell my name, Shelley, without the E on the end. And my last name is S-T-A, A as an apple, R-R.
Thank you.
For the record, I will not willing to reveal my address. Is that?
That's fine. Please
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Your Worship.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the city bylaw within Kootenay Avenue in Prince Rupert and McKay Avenue. And there are vehicles in Prince Rupert who are not abiding by the law, and they're using it as if it were a racetrack, and it is not a racetrack. and they're speeding on along McKay Avenue and Kootenai Avenue. And I live on Kootenai Avenue, Your Worship.
Okay.
And Your Worship, downtown around Tim Hortons,
Right.
getting down to downtown core.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing trucks, vehicles of all make, running solid red lights, people on their cell phones, Your Worship, and not slowing down. And Five Corners is another issue, Your Worship. Five Corners in Prince Rupert, going towards the ferry terminal. And they're not coming to a complete stop and not respecting pedestrians right away. And they run the stop sign, Your Worship. And the police, I would like to see the police, the city police in Prince Rupert, step up.
Okay. So in those three areas, Five Corners and 2nd Avenue around Tim Hortons
is really bad.
and on McKay Street and Kootenai Avenue
And 4th Street,
and 4th Street. Okay.
Your Worship.
McKay Street and Kootenai Avenue. What time of day?
It don't matter if it's day or evening.
Okay.
During the day, you see it a lot, Your Worship.
Okay.
And it's just, and it is a family oriented, it's low income housing. There are little children on skateboard, Your Worship, on McKay, and they'll ride down the hill. And then you have cars speeding around, if it were a racetrack, and racing right up McKay Avenue. And at the bottom of McKay is Macola Housing. It's no longer BC Housing here in Prince Rupert. It's now Macola as March 1st of 2014, Your Worship.
That's correct. The council's been advised of that.
Okay, Your Worship. I just thought to quickly bring it up.
Certainly.
I hope I didn't go over my boundary mentioned.
Not at all. So, go ahead.
And I'd like to speak on another topic, please.
Okay, if I could just provide you a comment
Okay, Your Worship.
on the speeding. We will ask the RCMP to do enforcement in those areas.
Excuse me, Your Worship. Thank you.
Your other topic?
The British Columbia Ferry Corporation.
Yes.
We need, as a Democrat, as an NDP member here in Chambers, and speaking on behalf of Democrats here in Prince Rupert, is we need to stop the cuts. No cuts to the BC ferries. No cuts to the senior free fare on certain days on certain routes. It will be devastated. The Christy Clark government wants to impose, and so we want to keep the pressure on, Your Worship. No cuts to the BC ferry fleet along the North Coast or anywhere in British Columbia. The North Coast we will be hit extremely hard. And I've been watching the legislature, BC Ferries, is being brought up a lot by member Jennifer Rice and other members of the Democratic Party, the NDP. So I told member I would be speaking on this topic.
Certainly, and if you like, I'll outline for you what the city has done.
Thank you, Your Worship.
You are correct that on Route 10 from Prince Rupert to Port Hardy, the provincial government wants to cut 39 runs, which is 32% of the service. And on Route 11 from Prince Rupert to Skidegate, on Haida Gwaii, the provincial government on that route wants to cut 27% of the service. So since the Council approved the efforts to oppose the reduction of BC Ferry services, the following has been done. A report was produced by a contractor with a recommendation as to why service should not be reduced without other considerations. The Chair of Tourism Prince Rupert and the contractor and myself attended the North and Central Coast Ferry Advisory Committee meeting. Subsequently, the contractor and myself met with the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure and his staff and presented the report and discussed it and its recommendation that they should not make changes until they do other considerations. The Chair of Tourism, Prince Rupert, spoke to the matter and the concern on CBC Radio. The report and a cover letter were sent to each municipality, regional district, and tourism association from Haida Gwaii to Valemount, Valemount is adjacent the Alberta-BC border, so we covered from the west to the east. We also sent it to those entities mentioned, from Prince George to 100 Mile House and from Port Hardy to Nanaimo. We also sent it to the Union of BC Municipalities, which is the local government lobbying entity on behalf of all local governments in British Columbia. We also sent it to the BC Chamber of Commerce, who came out with a recommendation very similar to the one in our report. We sent it to the North Central Local Government Association and the North and Central Coast Ferry Advisory Committee. I've also spoken to CBC Radio. I've spoken to CKNW Radio and CFAX Radio and CFTK Television and Radio and some of the members of the print media. Our North Coast Riding MLA, Jennifer Rice, brought the matter up during question period in the legislature. And I've talked to some community mayors who are sending letters questioning the proposed reduction in ferry service. The Union of BC Municipalities is reviewing the matter and will be providing comment through a committee. And the chair of the Skeena Queen Charlotte Regional District is our committee representative. And that's the present status on this matter.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, we need to really oppose this going through the House and opposing the cuts all around here on the North Coast and other places in the province of British Columbia.
Yeah, we are doing that.
Yeah.
And as you recognize, it's just not the North Coast.
No.
Really, the lifeblood of the tourism industry is
It's
the highway corridors that are connected to each end of a ferry route.
It's going to be affected.
That's correct. We've also heard from travel agents in Britain, or pardon me, not in Britain, but in Europe generally. And there was one that would send 100,000 tourists a year to British Columbia. They're no longer coming because, of course, these BC ferry trips have been booked into 2014 and 2015, and now they're changing them. And they have very strong liability requirements when they're in the travel industry and they can't provide trips. So that's 100,000 tourists a year that are no longer coming. There's been another company that brings 225,000 tourists a year, and they're also very concerned and are considering withdrawing service. So this is a huge impact, and it not only affects our community, but it affects the communities along the way, whether it's campgrounds, whether it's
Right.
bed and breakfast, whether it's hotels, whether it's eateries, whether it's museums, whether it's heritage sites. I can just imagine that if we have 15,000, 10,000 less people a year going out to North Pacific Cannery and in Terrace not going to the Heritage Village, you can
Right.
just imagine where they're going to come looking for additional revenue. That's going to be from all of us here.
Not very much.
It's not a good state of affairs.
No. And the cruise ship, are they still coming to Prince Rupert?
We will have 11 cruise ships this year, but they'll
Okay.
be of the smaller, they're termed pocket cruise ship variety,
Okay.
anywhere from 72 passengers to possibly 600 passengers.
I was hoping that the Norwegian Star was coming back, but that is a nice big cruise ship, your ship.
Yes, the cruise ships that carry 1,300 passengers, 1,700 passengers, 2,500 passengers, perhaps in the future will be back.
Yeah, we would like to see them back, the bigger cruise ships. I mean, I think Prince Rupert would love to see the tourism and Your Worship. I think that ends my... It's nice to be here in chambers again, and I have no further questions for Your Worship.
Okay, well, thank you for your questions.
And thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward and ask a question about the city's operations?
Larry Golden, 1601 2nd Avenue West.
Good evening.
I want to ask about the city gives passes, sells passes to staff, fire department, and RCMP for $120 a year. I figure that's about $560 to $600.
The passes for what?
Oh, excuse me, passes to the Civic Center to use the
the recreation facility.
The recreation facility. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't look it up, but I think this has gone on since about 2009, and probably the price hasn't risen. I'm not objecting, or I'm not even mentioning that they're giving a reduced price, which I'm dubious of, but I would still think it hasn't been raised since it first started. So I would tie it to adult seniors, to an adult's, which I think is on the order of $560 for that same $120 ticket. So I would suggest that A, we report how many people are using it. If only 6 people are using it, it doesn't matter. But 2, I would make it when the adults go up, the 120 should go up. I don't think it should be there, but it has been done, and it will probably remain the bad part of it is you just don't want people to forget about it. Oh yeah, I mean the staff won't forget about it, but the public should be aware of it.
This matter has been the subject of some discussion by a previous couple of councils, and it was initially established as an inducement to have people exercise. And of course, any organization that encourages its employees to exercise, they end up being healthier with less consideration for the medical benefits. Mr. Long, have you got any comments on this, or Mrs. Bombin? This has been with the city for quite a while.
Your Worship, as I understand it, when it was first implemented, it was to encourage the health and welfare of our employees and to reduce the amount of sick time that occurred. And there actually isn't a whole lot of people that are on it. And I don't believe that we actually heard a question for me to actually answer.
This is Mr. Golden's style. You have to kind of try and pick him out as he's moving along. Your specific question, Mr. Golden.
I did ask a question, I made a statement. I was saying, would you tie that rate to the seniors rate? So if you're going to raise, so you would go back and see when that was implemented and what the adults rate was then, and then correspondingly change the rate to, if it's now $560 as opposed to $420, then you would bring it up correspondingly.
Mr. Golden, you're asking the council if they would tie the rate. It's pretty hard for a staff member to answer that. So you're asking the council if they would tie the rate to the adult rate. Is that what your question is?
I'll keep my 4 options till later. Go ahead.
Councillor Ashley.
I just wanted to bring up another reason. While the passes were originally intended and are still being used for health and welfare, and it sounds like there's not that many people that are on it, so it's probably not a huge cost issue. I also was an issue in terms of trying to reduce vandalism because it increased adults that were at the Civic Center, like from the RCMP or the fire hall, and just as an extra people around just to kind of reduce that, because I know there was an issue with that at a previous time. And just to give a comment on it, if you think about how much sick days cost, I think we get a lot of bang for our buck with this policy. So,
I'm not addressing the policy per se. I'm just saying tie the rates to the.
Right. Councillor Ashley, then Councillor Garon.
The whole point of making it a lower rate is so they're more likely to use it. If you start increasing the rate, then that might go down. And that's all I'm going to say about that, but that is the whole purpose of lowering the rate.
May I come back that when I go by that flashing beacon at the Civic Center, it says, donate money for kids to come play. I mean, etc. So $69, I don't know how much that $69 is going to get them.
Councillor Garon has a question. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. I do agree with what you're saying. I think maybe we should up the rate a little bit. If we up the rate for adults to use the pool or the arena or the Civic Center, then probably we should up that rate a little bit. And a question for staff on this issue: if people aren't really using, if staff is or the employees are not taking advantage of this, then why are we as a council doing this? So, thank you, Mr. Golden, for bringing that.
The reason why the council's doing it is, of course, as Councillor Ashley stated, it's to do with health and welfare of the employees.
But nobody's using. Very few people are using it. So,
well, we'll get some numbers.
We're not doing our job properly if nobody's stepping up to the plate to better their health and wealth, because we're offering free passes and
they're not free
passes. We're offering a very well reduced rate on passes, and very few people, I should say, are taking advantage of it.
And may I add that it's not even, you don't even have to buy the $120 pass. You can buy a $10 a month pass.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Just a question. When these passes first started, they were $120 and they've remained...
No, I think when they first started when some members of council first dealt with it 6 years ago, there was no cost at all. And there was a concern from the public that everybody should pay something. And so there was a rate established. And of course, Mr. Golden's discussions are, as other rates go up, this rate should be tied to other increases.
Okay, so the $560 yearly pass for adults, in the last 6 years, how many times has that gone up?
You'll have to refer to staff for that. Perhaps it's best if staff gets a report. Nobody's got the answers to these things right here tonight.
Okay, because I can see it going up proportionately, percentage-wise, tied to the other one. I don't have a problem with that.
I think everybody would understand that. Mr. Long, if you could have the
when we bring the rates
and the treasurer put something together, please.
And could I add, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, you used to be able to go to the gym during the afternoon and play for free. Right. Anyone. You didn't even have to be a city staff.
Right. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to ask a question about the city's operation? Please come forward, Mr. White. Good evening.
I'm not sure if this is the right time. It's a question about the budget.
There'll be another place when we get back into the regular council meeting agenda for that. There is an opportunity to comment on the city's 5-year plan, so that would be the appropriate time. I'll ask one more time for anybody who wishes to come forward and ask a question about the city's operations. If not, we'll move on. I'll ask council to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting so we can reconvene to a regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. We'll now go back to the regular council meeting agenda. I'll ask council to consider the adoption of the regular meeting agenda. The recommendation is that the agenda for the regular council meeting of March 24th, 2014 be adopted as circulated with the inclusion of item 8B, and this is an item from Skeena River Helicopters. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. In discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The agenda is adopted. For council's consideration, first are 2 sets of minutes. The first are a set of minutes from the special council meeting of March 10th, 2014. The recommendation is that they be adopted. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded. Okay, well, if you'd like to second the motion, then we'll get into errors and omissions, and we can certainly delete your name. Are you seconding the motion? Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that the minutes be adopted. Now, are there any errors or omissions?
Yes, I was not present at that meeting.
Okay. Please, Mr. Mandrick, have that attended to. Are there any further errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. Next is the recommendation that the minutes of the regular council meeting of March 10th, 2014 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Kenny, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Are there any errors or omissions? Councillor Garon.
Yes, I was not in attendance.
Okay, perhaps your spirit was with us.
Who knows where mine was at?
Were you off in Trinidad or somewhere else? Mr. Mandrick, would you please show that? Thank you. Are there any further errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. We'll move on to petitions and delegations. This evening we have a presentation from Miss Stephanie Ellen, and she is the Senior Project Officer, Development Asset Strategies for BC Housing. I'd ask Miss Ellen to come forward, please. Good evening. Thank you for appearing this evening. Your first time in Prince Rupert?
No, second time. Second time here now.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. I think there's a slideshow that I did send along to go with my presentation.
We'll ask our IT representative to come out. I think he's primed for the occasion. Good evening, Luke. Are you?
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Please proceed when you're feeling comfortable.
Okay, so thank you, Your Worship, councillors and staff, for this opportunity to chat with you this evening a little bit about what I do and what BC Housing is doing these days to create new housing. As you said, my name's Stephanie Allen. I'm a Senior Project Officer. I work in the Development Strategies branch at BC Housing in the Lower Mainland. That's where my head office is. Our group is responsible for the development of new housing across the province. Another colleague and myself, we are responsible specifically for the North region. And tonight I'll talk a little bit about how BC Housing creates housing in the current economic climate and time of program cutbacks, and a little bit about the opportunities that we seek to create housing through our partnerships. So just a little background, BC Housing was created in 1967. Our commitment and our mandate is to provide housing options for those most in need. We do this by continuing to evolve our system of housing and support for British Columbians through the development of new housing, the maintenance and redevelopment of existing housing, and by direct cash assistance to individuals or families in the private rental market. In 2010, we also gained responsibility for the Homeowner Protection Act, and the Homeowner Protection Office is now a part of BC Housing. We are a National Housing Act insured lender, which is important because it creates some abilities for us to provide and facilitate projects and partnerships. So we create housing in the provincial jurisdiction of BC, which is reflecting a gradual withdrawal of the federal government over time, which has been continuing for some time now, in their provision of housing. So it creates some benefits, but it also does create some challenges for BC Housing to create housing. This is a hard to read slide, I apologize. Basically it shows our involvement. We cover a spectrum of housing needs, everything from emergency shelters for the homeless through to affordable home ownership. We develop thousands of new units per year through our programs and our partnership initiatives. And these are led primarily in the current model through the nonprofit housing sector. We support home ownership also through our licensing of home warranty builders and through home adaptation so that folks can stay in place with limited mobility. So while we're a very big organization with many functions, the Development Strategies branch is responsible for the delivery of new housing. And we do this through funded programs and our ability to loan and arrange financing. As a project officer, I wear a lot of hats, play many roles, and it depends on the project and the circumstances and the stakeholders involved just how our involvement looks. We may facilitate partnerships or advocate for groups to work together. We may provide advice on how to structure projects. In some cases, we just directly project manage and develop units through what we call direct delivery. In the case of funded programs, we are involved in the selection of nonprofit housing providers either through request for proposal calls or through their applications to us. And after the selection of projects through the approval process, we give guidance and oversight as they go through building and operating the housing. So this colorful graph kind of sort of demonstrates our housing model. And the graphic represents the fact that it's really not a firm and solid structure. It's very fluid, but I'll describe a little bit about how it works. In the current provincial housing development model, BC Housing works with nonprofit housing sector and other stakeholders. We deliver the programs and the nonprofit housing providers deliver the projects. Stakeholders, including the ones listed here, including yourselves, contribute in many vital ways to bring new housing to life. Nonprofit partners are the primary means through which housing projects are delivered around the province. They take the lead in the planning, delivery, and operations. And this is due in large part because nonprofits know the community needs best. They are well connected to the services and existing infrastructure in a community. And that's often the most essential parts in making affordable housing projects work and thrive. BC Housing's role is to support that work through the programs and the funds that facilitate the delivery. Our frameworks are developed based on particular initiatives, either coming from the federal or provincial level, and then requests for proposals are issued based on a program's particulars. For example, past program frameworks included the Seniors Rental Housing Initiative, which occurred province-wide. There's also been the Provincial Homelessness Initiative. Sometimes we have initiatives that target families, that target other groups. So based on those programs, we would be seeking projects to come through. We also provide standards for nonprofits to engage and lead the development process with their team of consultants. Housing development, as you know, very complicated process with very many professionals involved. Sometimes projects require rezoning, sometimes OCP amendments, complex financial and legal planning. It's important that nonprofits are fortified with the right team assembled and in place. We also use budgeting and cost management tools to ensure that sound fiscal management principles are brought to the process, and these are available to nonprofits for free. We develop and refine these tools over time, and they're available on our website also. Once submissions are successfully made to us, we stay involved through the development, constructions, and ongoing operations. We're there as partners to provide feedback, information, and guidance and oversight to those projects. Our community partnership initiative is kind of our key tool right now, and it's the tool we use in the absence of what we call program funding or grant dollars from either level of government. It's our initiative to fill those gaps that we have been experiencing for the last few years. It builds on the housing development model, which we just chatted about, but it really relies heavily on stakeholders. It's joining multiple partners together to develop housing. At its foundation are finance tools that create the opportunities to save money from the capital budget and in the operating costs. It helps lower the mortgage and through lower interest rates and reduced fees. These savings become an equity contribution to the project for which BC Housing would then seek assurances. Some of the benefits to our CPI program is that it's available. We lend Treasury Board funds on a rotating basis, so there's an ample supply of funds available. It's flexible. There is no prescribed form that a project must take. It must simply fall within the housing continuum that we just looked at. And it must meet the basic debt coverage ratio. The loan can be applied to part of a project or the entire thing. It can be used not only in new construction, but it also could be used to purchase and redevelop or renovate existing housing. We also have our low interest rates on both the construction financing and the takeout financing. Now, our financing is available on the takeout side only to nonprofit groups. However, our construction financing is available to developers or industry partners who are committed to providing affordable housing. They must just find their own takeout financing at the end of the project. Now, there's an opportunity to combine our community partnerships initiatives, which is our loan, with program funds if or when they're available and for the qualifying projects that those funds would be applied to. Now, our local government partnerships are particularly important. The majority of housing happens within the boundaries of municipalities, and land use planning is a key component of a city's management of their growth and well-being, be it socially, economically, and culturally. And so to facilitate the creation of affordable housing, we work together with local governments who can take the leadership roles in certain areas. These areas include the need and demand research. What is your community facing today? What do you expect it to be facing in the future? Identifying those housing priorities from that research. Is it families? Is it seniors? Do you have a need to provide transitional supports for people leaving homelessness? And then also there's the supporting of development, the tools that municipalities have at their disposal. Sometimes, and depending on the jurisdiction, it's a relaxation of development cost charges. It's a reduction of permitting fees, fast-tracking approvals. Some jurisdictions, approvals are 2 years. So you can see how that would have a very large impact on costs to scheduling. They could also partner specifically in the north, with the Northern Development Initiative Trust. There is a municipal tax incentive program to facilitate development in the downtown core. From what I understand, that may have been passed here in Prince Rupert already. And there's also the opportunity to provide land or identify land where there are partnerships that you would like to seek to create housing. And then finally, you can enter into an MOU or a Memorandum of Understanding with BC Housing. And that would basically take and identify what BC Housing would bring to the table, what the local municipality would bring to the table, and identify sites or potentially just targeted housing needs in your community. And from there, requests for proposals could be issued into the community for either market developers or nonprofit housing providers to answer the call to create housing. Another opportunity is also with Workforce Housing Solutions. We share your concerns about housing, especially as it relates to the impact of the economic boom times that are coming from the resource development in the north. It's happening from the northeast to the northwest. We're seeing the early indicators of this across the north. And we reach out to industry directly through our partners and ourselves and ask them to consider developing housing opportunities in the course of them developing their projects. Mines and utilities and LNG, they all have different housing needs. They all have different build-out timelines, but there are opportunities where they can partner. If they don't need to create purposeful housing, they could also look at leasing units in purpose-built housing. They could work jointly with nonprofit housing providers or with BC Housing to look at that, using some of that housing for the eventual turnover to affordable housing stock. They can also create legacy opportunities through donations, and that may be one-time contributions to seniors groups or other housing providers where their impact in the community might not be as significant, but where they do want to create some meaningful contribution towards affordable housing. And there's also the example of BC Hydro's workforce housing project, which we are currently partnering with them as they think and prepare for the Site C dam should that be approved. So we're working with them, and that's a model where a resource developing group where their business is not housing, but they identify the impact of housing in the local community, and they are contributing purpose-built housing that will be eventually provided to the community for affordable and low-income rental. So that kind of sums up my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions about development in general, or perhaps we can talk about a more detailed conversation leading to any particular issues you might want to address.
Thank you very much. We'll see if council members have questions for you. It's one of the favorite topics of some members of council, so they'll appreciate that you're here. Councillor Garon, Councillor Thorkelson, and Councillor Ashley.
Thank you for your presentation, Stephanie. I'm just wondering, do you have any proposed projects for Prince Rupert on the table, or is there nothing happening at this point in time?
I don't have any proposals on my desk from any nonprofits, but I have had meetings since I've been in town today, and there's definitely research that we have conducted in the community as well, looking at our own stock that we own as it may reach end of life cycle, and so we are definitely identifying opportunities currently, but I don't have any applications that are in the process.
So what currently do you own? I missed the presentation from BC Housing. I was away. You didn't give that one, but there was a presentation from somebody from BC Housing.
That's correct. There was representatives from Canada Mortgage and Housing here that dovetailed with BC Housing, that also dovetailed with the group that's looking at expansion in communities as industry develops here, which could be quite quickly when you consider liquefied natural gas export terminals.
So how many units in Prince Rupert does BC Housing actually own right now? I've had that question asked of me because there's some confusion with what's been going on.
I'm not prepared. I don't know, honestly. I can get that information for you.
I can probably get it from staff. I'm sure you guys all got those answers from the last meeting. No? Okay.
You're welcome. Councillor Thorkelson.
I was interested, are there grants for that land use planning and the need and demand research?
So there are grants available for need and demand research through CMHC. They have a SEED program, they call it. It's a $10,000 grant. There are potentials for BC Housing to also offer grants, but it's case-by-case evaluated.
Because we certainly, this council certainly had concerns over a couple of issues. One is the need for targeted housing in town. There is we need to have supportive housing for people who now are being housed in a hostel situation instead of a home situation, and so we have a men's hostel that's run in our community, and many of the people there have issues where they don't fit into regular housing and need supportive housing, and so that's one of the things that I'm certainly interested in seeing is provided in our community, and the trouble is it's very difficult to have a nonprofit unless they are a nonprofit housing group that is just interested in housing, but it's very difficult to get somebody to look for supportive housing, and supportive housing is something that we need to have in our community. We need to have it built before we get the influx of a large number of construction workers and new people, because these people will be forgotten about, and we don't need to increase problems in our community. So how do we get supportive housing built in the climate that you're describing? And I had thought that BC Housing, there was an announcement that BC Housing got some money from the federal government that the provincial government is matching, something like $66 million. And I was hoping to see some kind of initiative that was going to be put out. The other thing is that we certainly need to increase the housing stock that BC Housing had in Prince Rupert. You've pulled down a number of apartment buildings and apartments, and now have a waiting list, I understand, at BC Housing. And just wondering if you're going to be building any housing units to replace the ones that you've torn down.
So I think a few items there you talked about supportive housing. Supportive housing does require a nonprofit operator in place to provide what makes supportive housing successful, which are the staffing and the services. So again, that's something we do provide help and support with. It's based on the need and demand study that comes forward and the project as identified. It also takes a lot of partners for a project like that to work. And it requires operating money. Typically, that money can either come from BC Housing or the Health Authority because of the nature of the clientele. So very worthy, and again, it's something that we would want to see come through in your need and demand, and we can work jointly with developing something like that. Then you talked a little bit about our immediate plans for redevelopment or development or replacement of housing stock. I'm not familiar with which projects came down in Prince Rupert over the last number of years. It wouldn't have been under my tenure. But there are a number that I'm aware of that are starting to reach their end of life. So housing like that, typically it's no longer viable for renovations. And now you have to look at redevelopment. The costs of redevelopment are significant, and so that takes partnerships, again, with our current model. As you mentioned, it's tougher to do when there isn't direct granting and program dollars to make those things work. So there's some opportunities that we are currently looking at now to address that. Forgive me, I forget your final question.
No, I had three. I think you answered them all. Thank you.
But it's definitely, I would say it's definitely something that requires an intensive walk through the details and to be supported with both our research and the numbers that are coming through in your community.
Councillor Ashley.
Thank you for your presentation. In the presentation you mentioned, and you mentioned it just now, about helping communities identify needs and demands. And what I'm wondering is, we know we've got LNG and other proposed developments coming in, and I'm wondering like how BC Housing might be able to, say, work with our community to identify those needs and demands, possibly in conjunction with the industries that are looking here, so that we could like present them with saying, this is what we need, how can you help us? So I'm wondering how BC Housing could perhaps help us facilitate that.
And I think that's exactly the kind of opportunities we want to help with, and we see the need. It's too late after the fact. So when you're able to sit at the table, and oftentimes the municipality will sit at the table before we ever would. You're going to be approached by industry before we would have that chance. But we'd love to support helping you identify what your ask would be or what you're seeking from industry partners who are willing to participate. And that's something we've done in other communities, and we'd be happy to help with that, drafting that.
Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ms. Allen, as you probably know, we have a very large senior population in Prince Rupert. Have you any plans on adding on to your area up there where you have a few? I think you have 6 units or 8 units up there.
I think you're referring to the seniors rental housing on Kootenay. So that was a specific provincial initiative that happened a few years ago. That program was based on a modular construction program. It was, I wasn't here for the one that happened in Prince George, but I did, Prince Rupert, but I did work on one in Prince George and other locales. So that was a specific funding program that came from the federal government, so it had money attached. we don't have anything right now, although you did identify, Councillor Thorkelson, that there was the new announcement that came through. So there is an announcement of money. We don't know exactly how it's being prescribed, what those programs are yet. We're hoping for that information to come soon. But when there are funds available and needs identified, we are looking at now applying both of our tools, the funds and the loan. Seniors housing has emerged in our data as well when we look at Prince Rupert. I did meet with some seniors housing groups today to talk about their needs. They are starting to see where they had vacancies, now they're having wait lists. It's something that, you know, to plan for now. So we are starting to talk with them and moving some of their thoughts through their need and demand and looking at what they may be able to do with their current sites, whether it's redevelopment, adding on, or what have you.
Thank you. Mr. Long.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've had a conversation with Ms. Allen this afternoon, which I think was very positive. I think this particular issue, because I think we've identified it as probably our most important issue to really get right in light of the boom. And we have indicated to her that we may encourage her to come back and do a bit of a workshop on this particular issue. And she's, I think, smiling, so I'm assuming she will come back. And I think that that's probably at the detail level the issue of doing the research which their department does, which is completely in alignment with the kind of research that we're going to be embarking on this summer. Shows a real collaborative partnership that can go on here. I think this particular piece will be very helpful for us, so we would encourage her to come back and engage us with respect to what their capacities are going to be.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your presentation this evening.
A pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Now is the opportunity for public comment, and this concerns the 2014 five-year financial plan. Mr. White, if you'd like to come forward, now would be the time. And good evening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down here this evening.
Is this on?
Yes. When councillors ask you questions, if they so choose, that light will go out and you'll have to restart every time you wish to talk.
Sure.
It was designed that way, not for you in particular. But.
Okay, my name is Dale White, and I posted a question on a social network, which was my first mistake, and I used my real name, which was my second mistake, so I'm here tonight, which is my third mistake. My question concerns the budget and the increase, and it's the option 1 budget, and I really don't understand all of the things that go on in a budget, but when I look at 10% over 1 year, and then a 6.5 and an 8% over the next 2 years, which is somewhere above 25% over 3 years. I find that excessive when we look at a cost of living of around 1 or 2%.
Certainly, and there isn't a member of council sitting here that would not echo that concern.
Right.
So that was given as an option, but please, if there's something you don't understand, take your time. Yep. Ask a question. We have the people that put the report together here. I'd like you to go away with some additional information.
Yeah, my question is, when you're looking at a budget, if you're going to add 10% on, it probably means that revenue has gone down 10% or expenses have gone up 10%. So what I would like clarification on is, what is it exactly is going on to make a 10% increase in 1 year justifiable?
Good question. Mr. Long, Mrs. Bombin.
Thank you. In a previous report, the increase in the budget from last year was identified. Basically, the large amounts were actually pinpointed out, and I can itemize them all over again for you. Staffing requirements is $300,000. RCMP increase is $287,000. Contractual employment increases were QP and ferry increase, fire department, and all associated employee benefits. Those all increased. in total, 400, 550, just about $700,000 there. Energy increase is $40,000, and there is an airport ferry busing contract expected increase of $145,000. And then there's also the visitor info center had not been included initially. It's $70,000. The election is coming up this year. It's another $30,000. Charles Hayes Field cost share maintenance is $20,000. Downtown parking project is $15,000. BC Ferries lobbying project $8,000, and some miscellaneous others all round out another $12,000. And that is where the extra $1.5 million is coming into play.
There may be some members of council here that would agree with you if you wanted to delete the election and the cost of that.
Again, big numbers confuse me. I can only look at a number like 10%, and when you give a number, and again, I'm not here to argue. I'm just clarifying. When you say 10% is the increase, a big number of $200,000 sounds like a lot to me, and I understand that. But is that a 10% increase over last year? Is the budget for fire or ferry or whatever item you're using, is it going up 10%? Are all of these things going up 10%? It just seems crazy for a city to be dealing with that kind of expense if it's justified. It seems crazy when the cost of living is 1 or 2%. That's all I'm trying to get clarification.
Certainly, yes. Mrs. Baumann.
I can only state that basically the increases are exactly as outlined. Those weren't the costs that we had last year, and there's increases in all those various sectors, and that's what's accumulating to a $1.5 million deficit.
Maybe why this gets confusing is that our budget is made up of a number of revenues, not just taxation. So there's also user fees, etc. So there may be a disproportionate impact on the actual residential taxpayers as a result of the mix of where we collect all that money, and there is a slide that shows that the residential taxpayers are footing over $6 million worth of the cost. So what translates into a 10% increase to you is a number of different factors. So yeah, I see where the confusion is. If it's just a 1 or a 2% tax or 2% increase in cost, then why isn't it just the same number with respect to our actual residential taxes? But it isn't, because there's a split of 4 or 5 different tax categories depending on what share they contribute. There's also user fees, etc., that really kind of skew there's no direct correlation, I guess what I'm saying, between our increase of $1.5 million increase in expenditure costs to the actual collection of how much taxes and who actually pays it. So the conversation was around a rate increase as opposed to an assessed value increase. We had that conversation, I think last time. And so what's happened is the assessed values have gone up around the 10%. So that's why that's a reflection of your increase as a residential taxpayer. I'm assuming you're coming and talking about the residential taxpayers, because so it's fairly complicated, and I hope I helped and didn't hinder through my explanation. But it isn't. There just isn't a one-to-one relationship between a percentage increase that the residential taxpayers are asked to pay compared to the actual increase in expenditures in our actual budget.
Mrs. Baumann.
Yeah, she can explain what I just said.
I would just like to say that if you stick around for my presentation after, hopefully that will shed a little bit more light for you as well.
There'll be a detailed presentation coming up. And in fact, in hindsight, perhaps we should have had that presentation before we asked for public comment. But the staff here put the agenda together their learning. Yes.
Your Worship, because I can see, first of all, you have to get a magnifying glass, okay, to read what the budget line items are, and I understand it's confusing. I'm going to move that we, if it's possible, that we change the agenda and bring in the description first of from our Chief Financial Officer, so that we can all be informed. It's way better, easier to ask questions after the information than before the information, and then be wondering. That's how the Department of Fisheries works.
You've started a palace coup, Mr. White. That'd be your fourth item.
I didn't intend to.
No, not at all. It's good that you come forward, because it's not readily apparent. It's difficult for the average citizen to understand. And we're always encouraging the staff here to, as much as possible, put things in layman's terms. But the way municipalities are funded, the way their budgets are different than any other entity. So I understand where you're coming from. So it's been moved by Councillor Thorkelson, seconded by Councillor Garon, that we have the Chief Financial, you're welcome, have the Chief Financial Officer do her report first, so that we can then have the opportunity for public comment. I'll ask Council's consideration of that. Questions? Questions been called? No, go ahead.
The only thing I wanted to suggest is that because there's been people that have been waiting since probably 7 o'clock, if somebody had a quick question they wanted to ask because they needed to get out of here, I would say that maybe we could let them ask those quick questions and then do the presentation, if that's okay with the mover and seconder.
Is anybody else wanting to ask a question about the city's operation besides the budget? Yes, please come forward.
I'm not sure whether this is beside the budget. My name is Don Scott. Live at 160 Van Arsdale Street. And good evening. I actually arrived here in connection with the public hearing, but while I'm here, I just wanted to ask about the under background, the Digby Island Ferry. The last part of it, our community pays not only a user fee to ride the ferry, it also subsidizes the operation through taxation, and 2014 predicts a subsidization of $900,000, which is a significant part of our budget, which we take care of through taxes every year. And I would like to, I did read here that where is it? Oh, here we are. Okay. In addition to these revenue challenges, this is under the summary, the city maintains the unique service of operating the Digby Island Ferry in other areas of the province. The highway would be extended to include the ferry service. So I would like to know what, if anything, has staff or council been doing to pursue the province to cover the cost of the ferry service. My understanding is that the province, I believe their legislation says that their access to airports is a responsibility of the provincial government. Could I have comments on that?
Certainly. The province has disputed that. And the province did, though, during Premier Gordon Campbell's time, contribute $300,000 for a detailed engineering study. The city of Prince Rupert put, just going by memory now, I think the province put in $150,000. The city put in $100,000. Metlakatla and Lac Wallams each put in $50,000 each, and Port Edward put in $10,000. It was $310,000 for a detailed engineering study. That work has been done on a route and a bridge from the mainland of the Tsimshian Peninsula to Digby Island, and also the relocation of the ferry dock on Digby Island from Divernet Point to Toby Point. The whole thing is proposed to be built to a Class 1 highway standard, which means you could haul heavy equipment. And the dock at Fairview and the new dock at Toby Point would be updated to that standard. And that would reduce the ferry run from 23 minutes one way to 10 minutes. That information was done. It was presented to the provincial government by ourselves and the Aboriginal governments and the District of Port Edward. And the provincial government stated that they could do nothing further until there was enough demand created by industry to warrant a change. So if the city would like to proceed with any part of that, perhaps moving the dock from Divernet Point to Toby Point, building 1.5 miles of road and putting a new dock in, we'd have to do that ourselves. But with all the economic development that's being proposed around here, it may in fact increase the opportunity to make changes. I hope that answered your question. If not, please ask.
Well, I don't know whether it still does address the question. I mean, who's responsible for access? Right now, we're taking responsibility, but why would there not be some legal avenue to pursue in connection with access? Because it seems to me that the provincial government has already acknowledged that they should be responsible for it. So,
well, in fact, the airport access road from Divernet Point to the airport, well, a very short portion of it is on Metlakatla reserve land. The rest of it is on provincial government land. However, they refuse to acknowledge any ownership of the road, which is why between the city and the airport authority, last year there's been improvements made to the road and there's been more planned. And the Prince Rupert Airport Authority worked on that issue for about a year, and it was to no avail. The province would not accept it.
Okay.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Councillor Thorkelson has a question for you, though. And thank you for coming down here this evening, by the way.
Mr. Scott, why do you think that the province is responsible?
I believe that that's part of their regulation or policies. Actually, I think it was at the time that I was mayor, Mr. Smith indicated to me that that was the case. There had been some negotiation in connection with it. I believe that we took, or they took responsibility for the road to Ridley Island, which still leaves us with a $900,000 subsidy each year. I think that it's important to take another look at it, and that's why I mentioned, you know, well, it even mentions in here that others have their access taken care of by the provincial government, but we don't. So I think it'd be worthwhile to take a good look at the policy, the existing policies, and why the provincial government ignores our access.
Mr. Long, perhaps you could get a report from the Prince Rupert Airport Authority on this matter, seeing they just tried to deal with it last year. Mr. Scott, you are correct. There was a reassignment of some responsibilities there. I believe the highway contractor looks after the Ridley Island access road rather than the city, and I think the city may in fact do some other work for the contractor on other parts of the island because it's closer to the community. But we'll certainly get a report from the airport authority and find out what's going on. Councillor Cunningham also has a question for you. Please go ahead.
When you were mayor then, did you receive anything other than lip service from the provincial government? Did you receive any funds or anything for the road?
No. No, but that was, as I say, that was, there had been a negotiation that took place, and that was the outcome. was that the Ridley Island Road would be taken care of.
Was that a deal that was made at that? Was that a deal that was made at that time between your city council and the mayor? You traded off the airport road access maintenance for the Ridley Island maintenance?
I'm not sure of the timing. I don't believe it was actually during my, when I was mayor, actually. But I don't know the timing.
Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I know the Airport Society had tried to deal with the province on this, but I think maybe as a city council we should look at this because we are the level of government that should be dealing with this instead of the Airport Society, and I think we need to push through on this because I would really like to see some finality on this. I know the Airport Society worked quite diligently on it and came to a dead end, so I'd like to see it move to the council floor and have us try to push it forward.
Yes, thank you.
Can you read back the motion, Mr. Mandrick, please? Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Your Worship, that council direct staff, I guess, to get in touch with the provincial government. I'm sorry, I don't really have a wording for it. Sorry.
The motion about moving the...
It was a change of the order of the agenda items to allow Mrs. Bombin to do her report on the budget prior to further public comment.
Well, maybe I'll just make the motion again. Move that we ask the Chief Financial Officer, move the agenda item so that the Chief Financial Officer can make a presentation at present.
Moved by Councillor Thorkelson, seconded by Councillor Garon. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Just so we don't get ahead of ourselves here, I'll ask Councillor Garon if you would like to make a motion to direct staff to work on trying to resolve with the provincial government the Digby Island road access to Prince Rupert Airport and the responsibility and ownership thereof.
I'd like to make that a motion. Do you want me to read that out again?
Certainly.
Are you ready, Rory? That we make a motion to have staff work with the provincial government in order to take responsibility for the road from the ferry dock to the airport. And I would also like to throw in the ferry service as well.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Question has been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Mrs. Bombin, your report, please. Thank you, Luke.
I'm going to present the 2014 5-year financial plan options and unique challenges for the City of Prince Rupert. Presentation order is as follows. First, there will be a background, then budget requirements, discussion on service and revenue challenges, best practices regarding financial policy, and finally, options for 2014. This graph was included along with an article by Sean Thomas in the March 19th column of the Northern View. It shows Prince Rupert as having the highest combined mill rate amongst the communities polled. What this graph does not factor is the unique situation Prince Rupert has in comparison to the other represented communities. Each community has differing mixes of tax base and variances in services provided. These all contribute to who is paying the lion's share of tax or where these funds are being allocated. In essence, it is difficult to compare an apple to an orange. Also, the article doesn't comment on assessed values of homes. For instance, Prince George's average assessed value is $242,000. At their 2013 municipal mill rate, the tax is $1,623. In Prince Rupert, the average assessed value is $196,000. At our 2013 municipal mill rate, the tax is $1,772, a $149 difference. The following discussion will highlight many of the challenges faced in Prince Rupert that are not faced by other municipalities, including those in the graph as published in the Northern View. We have amended our budget for all known revenues and expenses. The current shortfall is now at $1,550,000. Adjusting the mill rate for the market change in assessments will result in a 10.2% increase to cover the projected shortfall. The city is aware that an increase of this magnitude is not palatable. However, there are reasons why the taxpayer's burden is increasing, and it goes beyond contractual obligations and energy increases. Our community desires a number of quality of life enhancements not typically found in a community of our size. If they do exist, they are not necessarily funded by the taxpayer. Many of these enhancements are funded through the city's community enhancement grants. This year, the grants total $1,373,000. This is money that must be generated from the tax base. Fortunately, part of this is offset by the monies the city receives from the casino, leaving $873,000 to be funded through tax. We are likely one of the few municipalities in BC that have to fund their own transportation to our airport. Most are accessible by road and light rail. Although many of our neighbors and visitors benefit from the proximity of our airport, they will only pay on a user basis. Our municipality pays not only a user fee, but also subsidizes the operation through taxation. 2014 predicts a subsidization of $900,000. Our community is fortunate to have one of the deepest ice-free port harbors in the world. We also have a port authority that oversees much of the shipping industry. Albeit the port provides economic opportunity for our community and has put our municipality on the world trade map, it also presents some interesting challenges. The port does not pay taxes in the traditional sense. The Port Authority is subject to payment in lieu of tax legislation, which translates into payments made to contribute to the taxation pool. Over the past 7 years, the city has used values as derived by BC Assessment and calculated the amount owing from the port to the city. Historically, the port has not remitted the amounts the city has calculated because they do not agree with BC Assessment's values. Because of the historical payments received from the port, the city has not budgeted the amount it calculates as owing in order to prevent an even a larger shortfall, sorry. Over the past 7 years, on average, the port has paid 35% of the amount calculated as owing to the city of Prince Rupert. As represented by the red is the shortfall, and the purple is what the port has remitted on average over the last number of years. In 2004, the province of British Columbia capped the major industrial mill rate for all municipalities with a port authority. Therefore, the city can only charge prescribed mill rates for industries that lease from the port. There are 2 mill rates that can be charged depending on when they were built. For those in existence prior to 2004, the rate is capped at 27.5. The industrial operations that are affected are Ridley Grain, Ridley Coal, and Fairview Terminals, or MAR. The second rate is set at 22.5 and is for all industries that came into existence after 2004. This includes Pinnacle Resources and new operations for Ridley Terminals. The city's 2013 major industrial rate is 45.05. Under the community charter, MAR Terminals is subject to a tax exemption regulation that exempts berth corridor improvements. For 2014, this exemption is equal to approximately half the total assessed value of improvements, meaning instead of being able to charge the capped mill rate of 27.5 on 30 million, the city can only levy the capped rate on 15 million. This slide shows the difference in the taxes that would be collected compared to what will be collected using 2014 BC assessment values. Provincial interference in municipal rate setting has certainly had impact. The blue is the Prince Rupert major rate, and the red is the provincially capped rate. Fairview is the bars on the left, then followed by Ridley Grain. Ridley Terminals, the old port. There's something that we still have called Houston Pellet Plant, but that was removed, I believe, so now it's just the land values. Then there's Pinnacle Resources and Ridley Terminals Newport, and then there's Sunwave, which does not fall under the provincially capped rate. That's why there's no little red line at the bottom there. The province does provide a compensation grant to all municipalities that had the cap imposed on them. However, it is only for pre-2004 industries. It does not include Newport properties, rather. The grant is only adjusted for inflation, and the province has indicated that the inflation rate for this year's grant is 0%. Since the assessable values of these properties declines yearly and the rates that can be charged are capped, the total intake in taxes from all port major industrial properties declines annually. The result is subsidization by the remaining taxpayers. This graph shows the change in trends since 1998 in the tax class burden. The closure of the mill resulted in the loss of one of the city's single largest tax contributors. Since then, the residential class has had to take on the bulk of the financial burden, with the business class coming up second. Unless there is more major industrial development, this trend will continue as residential and business valuations increase and major industrial port property valuations decrease. As you can see, the yellow line is the residential rate. The green line is the major industrial tax class, and the red is the business class. So now the residents are paying just over $6 million, $6.5 million, and the major industries are paying just $2.5. Kitimat is a port municipality. However, they do not have a port authority, therefore are not subject to the tax caps the province has imposed. This graph illustrates the tax class revenues in Kitimat. Again, the green is the major industrial tax class, and the yellow is the residential, with red being business and purple being light industry. The foregoing information is being provided so the public can understand some of the challenges the municipality faces when budgeting yearly. In the face of increasing costs, the city must find ways to achieve offering the same services with a declining major industrial tax base, which has had a provincially imposed mill rate cap and an ongoing dispute with the Port Authority about assessable values for the purposes of PILT payments. In addition to these revenue challenges, the city maintains the unique service of operating an airport ferry. Contractual cost increases cut into the amounts once afforded to community enhancement grants and property tax exemptions. Without increasing revenues to fund these valuable services, core services end up suffering shortages. The city currently doesn't have a policy to retain accumulated surplus. Accumulated surplus consists of annual surpluses added up over the years. There are 4 reasons why a retention policy can be considered sound financial practice. It sets aside funds for anticipated future capital expenditures. It provides cash flow to fund operations until current year taxes are due. It maintains a fund for emergency expenditures, and it provides a reserve for budget miscalculations or an unforeseen drop in revenues. In 2014, the city plans to use $1.96 million in accumulated surplus to fund needed capital purchases and capital works in 2014, leaving an unappropriated or unspoken for accumulated surplus of $3.85 million. The city also has plans to begin a water line replacement rehabilitation project, which will run from 2015 through 2018. Staff will be applying for the Build Canada funding, which will require the city to contribute 1/3 of the project cost. Currently, our third is expected to be $4 million. City staff hope to have adequate surplus, other grants, and reserves to be able to fund the municipality's share without utilizing debt financing. In the meantime, unanticipated expenditures do happen. A financial policy to retain a certain level of accumulated surplus and transfer any excess to reserves would be a financially sound practice. City staff do not utilize accumulated surplus to balance the budget without council approval. The following tables summarize 4 options that have been presented to council for their consideration towards balancing the budget. Each table projects the next 5 years and the implications the current year choice has on the next 4 years. The projections assume no change in assessment values through to 2018 or any new construction. Even in light of the previous discussion on accumulated surplus, we have presented an option that proposes the use of accumulated surplus with the understanding that council would like to minimize additional tax burden. Option 1. This option presents the projected deficits in the next 5 years based on information that is known. It recognizes only the amount of port pilt that is expected and does not propose any service cuts. You can see that there's quite a number of projected deficits and the associated tax increases that result. Option 2, this option presents the projected deficits after a full recognition of all PILT billed to the port. It also includes a reduction in 2 full-time equivalent RCMP officers. This option proposes using accumulated surplus to fund the deficit to achieve a 0% tax increase in 2014. The projected deficits in 2015 through 2018 are also presented there with an associated tax increase. Option 3. This option presents the projected deficits with the same full recognition of PILT and the reduction in 2 full-time equivalent RCMP officers, but instead of using accumulated surplus to fund the deficit, it proposes a tax increase to erase the 2014 deficit and a continuous 3% expected tax increase over each of the next 4 years. Even with a 3% increase for 4 straight years, in the absence of new construction, there are still significant deficits to budget for. Option 4. This option presents the projected deficits with the same full recognition of PILT and the reduction in 2 full-time equivalent RCMP officers, but instead proposes a 5% tax increase in each of the 5 years. The surpluses generated could be transferred to reserves or accumulated surplus. Larger than normal surpluses could be reduced by proposing a reduction to the tax increase. The last 2 options have been presented for the purposes of providing certainty to taxpayers in the years after the current year. Knowing in advance that taxes will be going up 3% or 5% a year, with the final determination being made on a yearly basis with the passing of the budget bylaw, provides predictability to taxpayers in advance. Should the amount be reduced due to new construction or non-market factors, or a determination that the additional surplus is not necessary to maintain optimum accumulated surplus thresholds, then a reduction could result. Additionally, options 2, 3, and 4 recognize the Port Authority paying 100% of the projected PILT. This has not been the reality and therefore could be overly optimistic. For this reason, staff recommended in the report Option 1, as it is more conservative and is financially prudent. However, in light of the imbalance shown on this slide, where the residential and business taxpayer are now paying the bulk of the tax burden, staff is recommending to Council Option 3, with the plan to spend the year working to adjust the tax load between industry and the residential business taxpayers. This option still retains surplus, and it provides predictability for taxpayers while recognizing that although there are still projected deficits, future new construction, time to come to an agreement with the port regarding PILT and the opportunity to highlight the harshness of the tax caps on our community. Staff believes this option is reasonable. All options have reflected the changes that will occur based on appeals to have not reflected the changes that will occur based on appeals to assessments. These changes will become known March 31st, 2014, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bombin. That's a very inclusive report. It's hard to do the projections when there's a certain amount of unknowns, but perhaps I'd ask you to, for the sake of everybody here, if you could put option 3 back up there, seeing that's the one that staff are recommending. It'll help because we have people in the room that are quite interested in this. If you'd like to, well, first of all, let's see if there's questions from members of staff, and then I'll ask you to take your seat over there when we get the public, but please stay where you are for the time being. Are there questions from members of council for Mrs. Bombin? Please go ahead.
I just have one further comment. I understand that our mill rate for heavy industry was 44. Is that correct? Somewhere around there? And what is Kitimat able to charge? 9?
I actually have that on my computer, which is over there, so I can get that to you.
Because I think you know, like our mill rate is actually very low. It's actually below the provincial average for heavy industry because we're trying to attract it. So if we actually even had the average for the heavy industry, it would even show a larger variation. So I just wanted to point that out when somebody says, you know, how low the taxes are in Kitimat. Well, they're even if we were able to charge, even if the port and heavy industry did pay at the rate that we have set for heavy industry, we would still be we would still have half of the income that Kitimat is taxing at that rate, right? So anyway, I just wanted to point out that our mill rate is very low.
Please answer if you'd like or comment.
I'd just like to comment that the graph actually showed for Kitimat that there's $12 million comes into Kitimat from major industry.
Councillor Ashley.
My question just has to do with this. We are going to discuss this later. Is that correct? So this is just questions for understanding?
That's correct.
Okay. Then I don't have a question.
Okay. Give you a chance to get over to your seat, Mrs. Bombin, and we'll see if Mr. White or anybody else has any additional questions. Mr. White, would you like to come forward? Now, if hopefully that provided some clarity, but if it didn't, please ask your question again.
Yeah, it did provide clarity. So what I'm understanding is that when the mill rate or the tax rate goes up on residences, it's because the city is kind of tied to the mill rate based on industries. We can't raise that. So the only way that we can raise, so the homeowners are ending up paying a greater proportion of the tax increases each year because we can't do anything with the mill rate for industries.
That's correct.
I'm just trying to clarify
That's correct. We have some impediments with regards to port-related industry, particularly port facilities, but also transportation-related facilities, as you've seen there. And there are caps in place, and it does create an imbalance. And the way we try to get around that is we encourage the port to come forward and pay more of the PILT, which is payment in lieu of taxes. The other thing we'd have to do is go to the various, not port-related industries, but the commercial industries here, or go to the taxpayer. The only other option we have besides going after everybody in the various taxation structure, with the exception of the ones that are capped, the only other thing we can do here is try and encourage as much more development in a reasonable way as possible to in fact increase the actual tax roll.
Okay, and sorry, one more question because
Certainly. No, go right ahead.
is there any way that the city can lobby the provincial government to change the cap, or the federal government to change the cap? I'm not sure which government is responsible. Is there any way that that can be done?
We could, but it's not that simple and straightforward, because there's other port-related activities in other municipalities, and to get some strength, we'd have to, in fact, encourage them to go with us. Whether or not we could do that, whether or not we'd be successful in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, it's a concern, certainly. Have you got any other questions? Let's see if council members have some questions, perhaps of yourself. Mr. Cunningham.
Right. Actually, it's not a question as much as a comment that this cap for the ports and that, it works out fine for the major cities because they have other places they can go to get taxes. I don't think in the overall picture it was designed for a small city like Prince Rupert and our port situation, whereas Vancouver, Nanaimo, Victoria, I believe, are the three major cities, and they have a lot of industry around their cities also, so they can go after them. And I really sort of took issue, and he's here taking notes, so I'll say it, with the Northern View when they did the mill rate comparison, because they compared us, a port city that's capped and it has no wiggle room, with a bunch of cities that are not capped in their major industry route. And, you know, it's fine and dandy to have a little bit of sensationalism in your article, but let's get the facts out there truthfully.
Councillor Ashley.
I just wanted to, well, thank you, Mr. White, for coming forward with your question. And I just wanted to make a comment as well, is that I understand what you're saying in that that fight might be difficult, but I do think, and I think it'll come up later, I do think it's a fight we need to start.
Perhaps a negotiation. Mrs. Bombin.
I just wanted to answer Councillor Thorkelson's question. The major industry rate in 2013 in Kitimat was 52.6.
Councillor Cunningham.
One more comment. We've had meetings with the port, and negotiations are going on right now, in all fairness, and until they're finished, I don't think we should be beating bushes in that right now. I think the port's, going to try and come up to the plate, I'm hoping anyway. But if they don't, then that's when we...
I agree with you. Councillor Thorkelson.
Yeah, the port's only part of the problem, though. I understand, but the port is the problem. The port is on land. They've been very clear that if it's not developed, land that's developed, what we have is that our mill rate is limited. We can't change that mill rate, and the provincial government subsidy goes down every year because they're not accounting for inflation. So we have a problem with the provincial government, who capped the mill rate at ours is 4 point whatever it is, and Kitimat, what did you say? Sorry, my memory is
52%.
52. And so I mean, even if we had a mill rate as Kitimat, or even the average provincial mill rate, the chart would even be worse. So I mean, it is the provincial government created that cap, and they're not subsidizing. They're only subsidizing the old stuff. They're not subsidizing the new stuff, and the cap that they set is ridiculously low. It's way below the provincial standard. They should at least be at the provincial standard. Their cap should at least be at the provincial standard, not lower than the provincial standard. And I have a whole file at home on PILT. It has been a huge issue, and about 7 years ago, many municipalities in the province got together to try to change it, because the Delta, all of those municipalities are charging their residents more because there's a cap on their heavy industry.
Thank you. I'll ask the public if you have questions regarding the budget. Now would be a time to come forward and ask. This is an opportunity for public comment on the 2014 5-year financial plan. Mr. Golden, good evening.
Good evening. I sort of wanted a general question.
Specific questions, please.
On the 4 the 4 options. I would hope that council would think it's their job to look at the options and not to have to choose between these. So the bad part is with one of those options was to get rid of 2 RCMP officers as opposed to finding some way to save $115,000. So I would think by choosing option 3, we really aren't getting rid of 2. We aren't saying we're going to get rid of 2 RCMP officers. We're saying that we will try to reduce the services or something by $115,000.
Mr. Golden, the city does not at this time have those 2 RCMP officers. So rather than make an allowance for them, we wouldn't bring them in as a result. So there's where you'd get the savings.
That's the first time I've heard that, but be that as it may, we don't have a fire truck rescue van either at $338,000 at the moment, which is double the $115,000 we would be saving. So it hasn't been passed, but I was wanting to ask: is that money? How is that money in? Will it be included in the budget? Will it be included as we're going to go make a loan, or was it $338,000?
Certainly, we'll get a comment for you on that from Mrs. Bombin.
The rescue truck was by resolution at the capital purchases resolution that was passed in December was accepted, and it is actually to be funded through the MFA on a lease. So the first payment is actually already included in 2014 and the 5 years outwards.
Mr. Golden, in answer to your first hope that the council won't just look at these options, it's wide open for council to determine what kind of increase they would deem appropriate, or perhaps no increase at all.
Or some variation on these options as opposed to choosing between the 4 options. Could you tell me what's going to happen with the $7 million which is in this budget, which is transferred to the something? So where is in the, so it's going to cost something like $400,000 per year to pay for that, and where is that money? So how are we doing that? We're the ones that borrowed the money.
Yes. Mrs. Bombin.
We will be borrowing the money if it passes, and we will be loaning it out to the Airport Society. The Airport Society will make all the payments that are required to the City of Prince Rupert, who will then go ahead and make the required repayments to the SQCRD, who will make the required payment to the MFA.
It was done that way because that was more affordable.
We already passed it, but that wasn't really my question. Is that money included in this budget here?
The $7 million is included as an income and as an outflow.
I saw that, but I'm talking about the interest payments.
It will be entirely funded by user fees.
I didn't even ask that. I didn't say how it was going to be funded. Is it in this budget here?
The interest payments are included in the user fees along with the principal repayments. And I would have to check with my budgeting officer, but if it was included, it would also be outflowed on a net basis of 0.
And I did try to see if the user fee for the airport has gone up, but I was told to ask somebody else, and somebody else didn't. So are we saying that user fee has gone up or will go up?
Mrs. Bombin.
I don't believe that they've put it up yet until they actually know that they're getting the loan.
And it's not included in this budget where you're giving how much the airport ferry is going to.
Councillor Ashley.
Well, I know the answer to that one. That's when they put the user fee in for the $14, then that money will be used by the airport to pay us back. The other thing I was going to ask, and I think this is true, the money for the lease for the vehicle that's in question, is that not coming out of equipment reserves?
Yes, it is.
But that would mean the $14 may or not have been added, but that's in addition to the $30, which is the airport ferry fee. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, so that fee that we see here it just includes the $30. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Please go ahead.
Larry, the airport ferry has nothing. Airport ferry doesn't have anything to do with the airport improvement fee, which will be put onto the price of the ticket. And what will happen is that the airport will get that money, and as Councillor Ashley has said, that they will then reimburse us. And so the $7 million in and the $7 million out is shown on this financial statement, as you said you saw. So the $7 million loan that we get in, that's money that comes in, and then we're paying it out, so it's money that goes out. So you're concerned about the interest payments. What happens is that when we give it out to the airport society is going to pay us pay us the cost of the loan and more, actually, to make us whole. And so yes, whether we pay it and bill them or whether they pay it directly, it comes out as zero, but it has nothing to do with the ferry because it's actually the airport itself.
But the airport is the $30, which is now being charged, isn't it? That's when you go over there, you don't go for nothing, so that's where the $30 comes in.
That's not the airport. There's two separate things. One's the airport, which has to deal with airplanes, and one is the ferry, which has to do with boats. And so the airport looks after the airplane and the takeoff and landing costs. The $7 million wasn't for the ferry. The $7 million was for the runway and for the building over there. So it's not included in the airport ferry. So if you're talking about the money that we pay to get onto the airport ferry, go over, and that is rolled into your ticket.
That's the $30 that's rolled into the ticket, is it?
Yeah, I think that's the rate. Is it $30? Whatever.
Yeah, and that's what's reflected in this revenue from the airport ferry.
Yes, but that has nothing to do with the $7 million.
They're two separate things.
Well, I know they're separate, but as long as we got to be sure where that money's coming from.
And there's two separate fees and charges. Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
One thing that should be pointed out to Larry, it's an option that Council's looking at, is increasing the ferry fares. We're looking at a lot of different things to get more revenue. Nothing has been decided yet, and we're still looking at a lot of other options to get more revenue in and take care of some of these things.
Mr. Scott, would you like to come forward? Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward and ask a question about the city's 2014 5-year financial plan? Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want the public to know that the port isn't all the bandits, but we are working with them and they are working with us. Thank you.
We'll move on to reports. This one's from the fire chief. It's the purchase of a new rescue van. Mr. Long, did you want to outline this?
Yes, maybe I could ask the fire chief just to explain what this particular expenditure entails and why it's necessary.
Thank you. Good evening, Fire Chief McKenzie.
Good evening, everybody. Up front is a new rescue. We're put a tender and a spec for a new rescue for this year. Our rescue that we now have is now 5 years overdue. It usually has a 15-year life expectancy. We are now in the 20th year. This rescue is our main response vehicle that carries all our extrication equipment, everything from rope rescue to jaws of life to first responder gear, all the stuff that we can't carry on a pumper. We're very limited on what we can carry on one of our other apparatuses. This is one of our frontline trucks, and as I said, it's well past due. So we've gone forward and after the capital budget and received all the costs, as his report says. I don't know if you want me to go into detail on the report, or has everybody pretty much read it? Everybody's happy with it? Any
Yeah,
questions
you've
on it?
outlined the essence of it. So let's see if there's questions from members of council. Councillor Garon?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Just the only question I have, and I know the answer, is that this truck that we have is currently at the end of its life, and legally you cannot use it once it's at the end of its life. That's why we're getting a new truck, if we decide to vote for this new truck.
Yes, the truck is well surpassed its life expectancy. As I said, these typically run for 15 years, and we're now 20 plus years on this truck.
So you fall under like the jurisdiction of Transport Canada, or I'm not sure what jurisdiction would say that this truck is no longer able to be used.
Usually the jurisdiction is that the trucks, particularly pumper trucks, will no longer get insured for use. And so that's when you have to turn them over.
It's not a pumper truck, this is a rescue van, so it has to be turned over legally. Is that correct?
No, there's life expectancy on them through the fire underwriter surveys when the insurance adjusters, those type of divisions look after these. And they recommend the years of replacement. And like I said, we've well surpassed our life expectancy on this. It comes to a point where you start spending more money in trying to maintain it, keeping it on the road safely than it's worth.
So how many years past its expectancy has it gone?
5 years now.
Councillor Ashley.
I'm going to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief McKenzie. So it's been moved and seconded that the council award the building of a new fire rescue van to Rocky Mountain Phoenix at a cost of $338,904. Councillor Ashley, speaking to the motion.
Yeah, I just, very quickly, when I look at this, I know we've got money in equipment reserves, which we put aside specifically so we can replace vehicles when they're at the end of their life expectancy. It's a safety issue, it's a maintenance issue, it just makes sense.
Thank you. Further comments? Questions been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The motion is adopted. Next is a report from the Economic Development Officer. It's a Dry Dock Subsidy Act. It concerns Council providing a letter of support for a dry dock in Prince Rupert. Mr. Long, would you please outline the basis of the request in the report?
Yeah, I think it's fairly straightforward, Your Worship. It's just asking Council whether they support this proposal for a dry dock.
Thank you. Councillor Garon.
I'll move the recommendation that we provide a letter of support for
Thank
the
you.
dry dock.
Seconded by Councillor Ashley. Any discussion? Councillor Thorkelson.
Yes, my understanding is that McLean Shipyards was not contacted, and I have a bit of a problem if McLean Shipyards is using public money to support one business against another business, and if McLean's had been contacted and has no problem, then I don't have a problem. But this is like I look at as supporting one business, which would be in competition with another business.
Right.
That already have and has stayed with our community through really bad financial times. And has tried to, keep that operation going with a huge downturn in commercial boats. And so that's why I have a problem with this.
So would you like the matter tabled until staff contact McLean Shipyard and ask whether they have an interest in this or whether there's any concern?
Yes, I'd move to table that.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Ashley that this matter be tabled pending city staff talking to McLean Shipyard to see if they're actually involved in this or whether there's any concerns. And then staff would report back to council. This matter would then be put on an agenda and lifted from the table. So there's a motion to table. Discussion. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The matter is tabled. Okay, we'll now move on to the report from the Chief Financial Officer. We've already had the presentation regarding the 2014 5-year financial plan the options and what are considered unique challenges. And there's a recommendation that Council determine what options staff should incorporate into the 2014 5-year financial plan and related property tax bylaw. Councillor Ashley.
There are things that I like in the various options, but I've been, as I'm sure we all have, thinking a lot about potential tax increases and how can we change the nature of everything so that we can avoid a hefty tax increase and still not put ourselves into jeopardy in the future. And this will either resonate with people or it won't, but the biggest thing that I can see as something that we could be sustainable with in terms of increasing service fees in the future, and that causes a huge drain on our municipality every year, is the airport ferry. I figured it out based on 60,000 passengers a year, that if we increase the ferry by $15, that would take care of the $900,000 per year that we subsidize the ferry. Now obviously this year, if we were to put that in, let's say in June, like halfway through the year to allow for time for bylaw increases, that would mean $450,000 based on the average amount of passengers we get. Chances are that with the increased economic interest we have in the community, chances are that there are probably going to be more passengers in the future, which should hopefully then account for any increases we might have in the ferry costs going forward. I know that there are considerations in looking at the airport ferry fee. Originally, I was thinking just trying to cover off the cost of the additional bus costs, but the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it. We have been subsidizing this for years. Basically, if we had the industry money coming in, it probably wouldn't be an issue. We'd have money, we wouldn't be talking about this. But basically, the residences and the residential taxpayers and the business taxpayers of Prince Rupert have been subsidizing the ferry hugely over the last, I don't know how many years, because I don't know the last time the ferry actually made money. And it's really not fair to people that never use the airport. As was pointed out, our neighboring municipalities that use the airport only pay a user fee, and I really think that that's something that we need to look at. So that's one idea that I have that I'm going to throw out there.
Yeah.
Another idea that I had was, and again, it might not be popular, but I'm kind of trying to get into the user pay mentality. Right? And so I think that we have a lot of wonderful services in our community, but those services cost money. And I think rather than, identify, say, this service, this service, this service, when I was looking at the amounts that services brought in just on a general basis and looking at, say, a 5% increase in service fees across the board and looking at that from a half-year perspective, it equaled around $50,000 that we could gather by just increasing the service fees by 5%. I also looked at a couple of things in terms of savings. One of the extra costs was in terms of election costs, and we can share those costs with the school district, which would mean that would save us $15,000 right there. Another thing, and this was actually proposed by staff at our budget workshop, that I think is maybe something we need to look at for this year. If next year things are better, maybe we could put it back in. And I don't know the total cost of this, but maybe this year we don't go to Ketchikan. It's a small amount, but it is an amount that makes a difference, right, when we're looking at huge costs. I was thinking maybe it cost us $5,000, so right there's another $20,000 between those two things. I was looking also at the idea of City West, and I know right now we've got a dividend in there, I think accounted for $250,000. I really do think, and I do believe that staff is planning on doing this, that we need to push for a bigger dividend. And if we're not going to get a bigger dividend, and this is sort of outside the budget process, but it's something I'm going to throw out there, that it might be time for us to look at a cost-benefit analysis. We have huge infrastructure costs going ahead. We need to look at pros and cons. I'm not trying to, say we should do one thing or the other, but if we're going to be prudent, then we need to start looking at those things. And the last thing, I do think that we should count the total amount of the port PILT. I realize that percentages over the years have not been the amount that we've been looking for, but I do believe we've been having positive conversations with the port regarding that, and we're getting closer to something that is in the realm of where we can both kind of agree. We're getting closer. So I think it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to include that in there. And when I added up those various things that I've said, and basically not including a dividend from City West because we can't guarantee that, but basically all of the other things, it comes up to just under 1.2 million, and then we could use the surpluses to cover off some of the other one-time costs, which would allow for a 0% increase this year. And then I would like to look at possibly coming up with some sort of fiscal policy, financial, to accumulate surplus over the next years. But I know that we've gotten some money from the port for previous PILT payments, and I'd like to be able to use that to try and give taxpayers a break. So those are the thoughts that I've had with the budget so far. So I'm not sure what other people think, but those are my thoughts so far.
Thank you. Those are all pretty good suggestions. We do, I believe, share the cost of the election with the school district. Mrs. Bombin, have you got any information on that?
No, that's right, sir. Actually, I put in 1.550 as being the shortfall, but it actually included part of the sharing. So.
Okay, so that's already been looked after. I know that City West has had its best year in the last 3 years. So perhaps we want to ask for a set amount, say 350,000 or 400,000 as opposed to 250,000. And while we're having a good discussion, I don't want to curtail that, but perhaps we should make a request to staff to see if City West could actually come up with a $400,000 payment of a dividend this year, because I know they're having a better year. Now, to be fair to them, they're having a better year because there's increases, but they still need to, in that business, retain quite a bit of money to buy new equipment to keep up with demand and increase. But Mr. Long, if you'd, on behalf of the council here, if you'd make a request to see if 350,000 or 400,000 is possible. One of your, I've got you, Councillor Garon, one of your suggestions there, Councillor Ashley, was to increase the ferry fare by $15, which is quite an increase. I know it goes to total user pay, but the concern is, and it may be fine for people that are traveling on business, but for the average citizen to go from a $30 ferry ride to a $45, and then you start to extrapolate that and you look at a family of 4, we might find that we're driving more people away. And I understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you, but of course we don't want to drive people away either. But you've got some good suggestions there. Thank you. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Ashley, just a question for you about the $15 increase. You based that on 60,000 passengers. So really you're talking about a $7 increase each way.
I suppose so. I was just basing it on the 60,000 number, but it's just 60,000 times 15.
So you basically you're factoring it at $7 each way. Yeah. Because okay, or $7.50. And I sit as an ex officio on the Airport Society board, and I think it would be of our best interest to sit down and have a chat with them first before we raise this, because they have a lot of more insight into how all these fees work and how it affects the airline. And I just think the more information we have from the Airport Society, you could make make the best decision on increasing any increase that we wanted to make. So.
Certainly. Would you like to make that a motion so that in fact does happen?
Okay, I'll make a motion that we meet with the Airport Society before deciding on any increase in fees. Okay,
that would be the Prince Rupert Airport Authority. Is there a seconder to that, please? Seconded by Councillor Thorkelson. Discussion. Councillor Ashley.
I'm not opposed to meeting with the airport board. I think it's a good idea. My only problem, and I'll be voting against the motion for this reason, is I don't want to be tied to having to meet with them before we make a decision. Because I don't know what timeline they have, if they're going to be able to meet with us before we have to make a decision on this. So I agree that I would like to meet with them, but I just don't want to be tied.
Okay, Mr. Long, how much time do we have here? You need to have this budget completed by law by May the 15th. We got enough time here?
We are pressed for time in terms of this sequence.
All right. Thank you. Councillor Garon.
I don't see any problem in pulling the board together. If they know that there's some kind of increase coming, I'm sure they'll hurry up and come and meet with us ASAP. So I know they spend a lot of time volunteering on this board. They've been working really hard to try to get the numbers up, and they are coming up at the airport, but we're also losing a lot of leakage to Terrace. And if we up these fees, we could even see more people leave, and your 60,000 number could be dropping. So I just think the more information we have, the better informed decision we make. You can decide one way or the other whether you're voting in favor or not, but I think the more information you have, the better decision you can make.
Thank you. Councillor Thorkelson.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Garon. I remember when we tried to raise the airport fee the first time I was on council. It was a real problem because there was such because it's on the ticket. There was pushback by the airline because they didn't want our ticket to start becoming a lot more expensive than the Terrace ticket. For their competition point of view. And so there was a lot of real pushback against putting it on there. And so we don't want to collect it unless we go back to collecting the fees on the bus, which is something that we fought long and hard to do, to get the fees onto the ticket. So I know that was a problem. The other thing is that the ferry increase, we are already having a ticket increase for the airport improvement fee, or whatever it's called. So you add the airport improvement fee increase onto a $15 increase that comes onto your ticket. All of a sudden, or a $7.50 increase. I'm not sure if people are going to swallow that. The other thing is and I just want to speak, Your Worship, about user fees in general. I'd just like to say the public in general subsidizes services in general. Otherwise, you might as well just have people paying for all of the services. And the reason they do that is because whether you use it or not, it benefits. I don't go swimming anymore. But the fact there is a swimming pool that I subsidize through my taxes benefits me. The fine line you have to do is try to figure out how much a swimming pool ticket should be so that we encourage as many people as possible, for example, to use the swimming pool. The fact that there's a theater benefits me living in this community because it is something that uplifts this community. The fact that there's an airport ferry is a problem, but the fact that we have an airport, all of us benefit, whether you use a ferry or whether you use that airport or not. The fact that people can come in and land here and come and go out the same night because we have a ferry. They're not driving back and forth and wasting an hour on the highway. If we didn't have a ferry, we wouldn't have an airport. And if we didn't have an airport, we would be like all of those places in the Kootenays where it takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to where you want to go. And if along that highway, if we don't have an airport, we all benefit from the fact that brings business to our community. So I'm certainly would like to listen to what the airport ferry people have to say, but I am not of the opinion that the only people that benefit from having that airport in our community are the people who fly in and out of that, use the airplane. I don't believe that's anything that we provide. Any of the services that the city provides only benefit those who use them.
Thank you. We are going to be having, I've requested the staff get a hold of representatives from the surrounding communities so we can have some discussion about regionalization of services, whether it's transit, whether it's policing, or it's the airport. And so we'll have that discussion. Unfortunately, by the time that comes together, it may be after the time that this budget's adopted. Councillor Ashley.
I'm hearing what other people are saying, and like I said, I'm not opposed to listening to the airport board, but I just want to counter some of the things. The fact is, I know that we've got a $14 airport improvement fee coming, and this would be an additional $15. I know that, I get that. I know that there will be some people that go to Terrace. The ones that go now will probably still keep on going. But the fact is, there's a couple things we need to think about. Number one of the reasons people are going there right now is because of WestJet. WestJet cannot keep up that fare. There is no way. They're going to have to get competitive pretty soon here. And number two, when you actually compare our fares with Terrace, they're not that much different. Okay? If you add on, let's say it's a family of 4, and it's an additional $60. Let's say it's an additional $120. By the time you add up the gas, the parking, a meal, because let's face it, and snacks, because if you're taking your family somewhere, there's going to be a meal and snacks. And parking, you probably have cut that in half. So you're saving $60 to go to Terrace. Now, for some families, I agree, that's probably a large amount of money. Myself, and I'm just speaking for myself, the convenience of not having to drive on the highway and being able to get on the ferry is worth that money to me. I totally agree that all the services that we have in our town benefit us, whether people use them or not. What I am trying to find out is a way, and I'm sure that you guys understand this, is a way for us to try and balance our budget without having, and in a sustainable way. That's why I'm looking at this. I'm trying to find a way to balance it through increasing fees rather than increasing taxes. They're both increases, they're just different ways of looking at it.
Mr. Mandrick, there's a motion on the floor.
Yes, Your Worship. It was moved by Councillor Guerin, seconded by Councillor Thorkelson, that staff arrange a meeting with the Airport Authority and Council prior to Council implementing any changes or increases to the user fees.
Okay, we should deal with that before we have any more budget discussions on that. Do you want to speak to your motion?
In regards to the difference in fees on what it costs to fly into Terrace as to Prince Rupert, I know Mr. Long was with me at a meeting. I can't remember who else was here when Air Canada came, and I think we were 113% more, or $130 more on Air Canada's ticket. So we look like we're more expensive than Terrace, like astronomically more expensive, because we're collecting the fee. We could go back to collecting the fee on the bus, but people didn't like that. It's one of those things. People got off the bus. They have no. Now everybody's got a credit card, but I mean, it's just one more thing for us to have to do. So it's more convenient for it to be on the ticket. So this is where I want you to sit down with the Airport Society or the Airport Authority, so they can explain some of these issues, that the airlines' numbers are different than what you would try to skew them with. So I'm just saying, the more information you have, the more informed decision you can make.
I'll call for the question on this motion. We can deal with that. We can continue the budget discussion. Question's been called. Those in favor? Those opposed? Motion passes. Please show for the record that Councillor Ashley and Councillor Kinney are opposed. Continue with comments, suggestions regarding the 2014 budget. Please go ahead.
The one other thing I wanted to say with the proposal I put forward, it did not include reducing our RCMP by 2. So.
I see. Further comments? Yes, please go ahead.
The budget last year, we budgeted. I see that last year we budgeted and we had to take $500,000 out of our appropriated surplus to balance, and I can see that we didn't have to do that. What was our actual surplus if you took out for last year if you took out the payment, the unexpected payment from the port?
If memory serves me correctly, you take out the savings from staff working without replacements last year, also in the port payment and a few other savings. We actually ended up, I think it was using about $300,000 in our surplus to balance.
So if we hadn't had cut staff and we didn't get the money from the extra money that we were, the unexpected windfall from the, or unexpected payment, so that's not a payment, unexpected payment on what they owe us from the port, then we would have had to dip into that by $300,000?
That's correct.
Thank you. Motions from council regarding this matter. Councillor Ashley.
Considering the motion we've just made that we need to talk to the airport board before we can consider the option about the $15, it's, for me, it's kind of hard to put forward any kind of option for the budget because that's a big part of what I would like to do. What I'm wondering is it possible for us to somehow get a meeting with the airport board, say next week, and then ask staff to maybe incorporate some of these ideas into a budget that we look at then? I'm just asking through you to staff.
Certainly. We could also at that time perhaps have an answer back from City West as to whether or not they could increase their dividend. Mrs. Bombin, is that possible?
We could certainly have a special meeting after having a discussion with the Airport Society and get direction from you, in which case then we can proceed with the 5-year bylaw.
And a discussion with City West. Thank you. Yes. Please go ahead.
Well, it's again. I didn't. I'll have to look at the minutes. I hope it was recorded in the minutes. Councillor Ashley spoke too quickly, and I couldn't write everything down that you have for your. Yeah.
I can email it to everybody.
The one of the things is again we talked about increasing things like the cemetery fees and looking at the fees and charges. I was wondering if there was any increase in here to the fees and charges.
There's no increase because there's no changes to the bylaw yet.
So is it possible to is it possible to ballpark what that increase, what an increase of say 3% or something? I think Councillor Ashley said 5% would be to fees and charges. What revenues that would bring?
Yes, it just simply taking the revenues that we generated in 2013 and assuming that we're going to get the same user patronage, and then adding 5%. Or 3% or whatever percentage.
And I just wondering I mean I guess this is getting to more work that maybe you don't need to do, but I was wondering what if you I know that last time we did a fee, we increased, for example, we increased transit, which is the one I'm thinking of. We had 3 different increases over 3 different years. And the last increase would have been maybe last year or this year? Last year maybe. So some of the things that we increased them over a 3-year period. Some of the things we increased, we only did a one-time increase. And so when if you look at something that hasn't been increased for 5 years, that's one thing. Something that's been increased every year is a different thing. And I remember that when we had Jim Bruce as our acting chief financial officer, one of the pieces of advice he gave was you should have a moderate increase, try to have a moderate increase every year so that you aren't facing having to increase everything so dramatically in 1 year. And a 5% increase is a fairly dramatic increase. So I just wondering what kind of revenue it would bring in if we had an increase, and maybe I just have to get my magnifying glass out and have a look and see which one of those line items we could increase it.
I believe actually at last year's public meeting during budget time, there was a slide that actually showed what a 5% increase to all the user fees would actually generate. I can pull that up and put in the 2013 numbers anyway, and then do a projection for sure. It wasn't a sizable amount though, but it is a reasonable thing to do, to just incrementally increase it over a certain number of years, just like we do with our utilities bylaws. And actually, I have to correct myself. We did increase the cemetery fees at the bylaw at the same time that we did the utilities. So those ones are already reflected actually in this budget. It's just any of the other user fees and charges that we haven't increased since the last time.
Councillor Ashley.
So what I was going to move is that we ask staff to arrange a meeting with the airport board, and then once we've met with them, arrange a special meeting so that we can then discuss the budget as whatever date they figure out.
Okay, so the motion's already been made to cover off the meeting with the airport board, but you could certainly make a motion about a special meeting of council should it become necessary next week.
Okay, yeah, we hadn't put a timeline on it, so, but that's fine, I'll just adjust that, so after the board meeting, we have a special meeting.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Discussion. Pardon me, Councillor Kenny. Discussion. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. We'll move on to correspondence for action. There's a letter from Mr. Michael McLaughlin of Rural Futures. Concerns a Northern Development Initiative Trust Marketing Grant. Trust Marketing Initiatives Grant. Northern Development Initiative Trust Marketing Initiatives Grant comes with a recommendation that Council write a letter of support for BC Ocean Boating Tourism's application for a Marketing Initiatives Program grant from the Northern Development Initiative Trust. Mr. Long, would you outline the background for this request, please?
Yes, Your Worship. It's fairly straightforward. There's a program here that's been laid out in the letter, and they're looking for council support if council believes it's an appropriate thing to support.
Maybe a way to increase recreational boating on the coast. Councillor Kinney.
I'd like to make that motion that we write a letter.
I'd like to make that motion that we write a letter of support for the BC Ocean Boating Tourism.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Kenny, seconded by Councillor Garon. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead.
Just something, and I know it doesn't necessarily take up a huge amount of staff time, but one thing I've noticed is that we've had quite a few requests for letters of support from various organizations, and they're always asking us, could we have a letter of support, but yet they never seem to supply us with a draft of a letter so that staff does not have to draft that letter in the first place. So I'm wondering if we should maybe just, as a policy, not necessarily a resolution, but as a policy, ask that when people are asking for a letter of support that they provide a draft just to save staff time.
Certainly. And if you make that into a motion, it will become policy. And then we can wordsmith the letters they send us.
I'll make a motion that we make that a policy because I do think it will save staff time.
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kinney. Is there any discussion? Questions? Councillor Thorkelson.
I don't know how long. Maybe we should ask how much time it takes to do one, because the letters of support I've seen are usually fairly short from the city, and I can write myself a really great letter of support and bring it to council, and like His Worship says, we could spend all our council time wordsmithing it. I think it's just better to have lots of times just they write council pass the following resolution that we support whatever. Other times it's a bit nicer. I don't know if we really want to start having the letter here. I mean,
Mr. Long, is it time consuming for staff?
Yeah, we have a fairly standard approach, so.
I'll withdraw the motion.
Thank you. Is that okay with the seconder? Yes. Motion's withdrawn. Okay, yeah, and I can appreciate that. Skeena River Helicopters, they want permission to land helicopters at McGuire Field. That's adjacent the Civic Center. And there's a annual community event, the National Aboriginal Business Opportunities Event, on April 29th and 30th, and they'd like to land there. And so they're asking for a letter of support, and if the council wishes to provide that, it would be that the City of Prince Rupert provide a letter of support to allow helicopters to land on April 29th and 30th, 2014, on McGuire Field at the Jim Saccone Civic Center, subject to the approval of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Transport Canada. Moved by Councillor Garon, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. We'll get down to resolution from closed meetings. There is a resolution from a closed meeting which concerns the Prince Rupert Airport Authority Board of Directors appointments. Mr. Mandrick, would you please outline that?
Certainly, Your Worship. We have a resolution to release the named candidates or successful candidates for their terms with the Prince Rupert Airport Authority Board. Would you like me to read the list of the candidates?
Certainly.
Certainly. Ms. Maureen Makarenko for a term of 2 years expiring April 2016, Mr. Ken Dolman for a term of 2 years expiring April 2016, Mr. Kelly Sauchek for a term of 2 years expiring April 2016, Mr. Paul Kennedy for a term of 2 years expiring April 2016, Mr. Mike Shaw for a term of 1 year expiring April 2015, and Ms. Judy Fraser for a term of 1 year expiring April 2015.
Thank you. Yes.
Was there not the other issue that we discussed? I can't remember the name of it. Staff can probably help me out.
I was going to report to it when I got there.
That'll come with the city manager's report. Next is the bylaws and development permits. For council's consideration is the zoning amendment bylaw number 3344, 2014. The recommendation is that following the public hearing, council give third reading and adopt the City of Prince Rupert zoning amendment bylaw, number just stated and the year just stated. Yes.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kenny. Discussion. Councillor Ashley.
Right now, I mean, I believe I'm in favor of this, but the only issue I have is Councillor Thorkelson was asking if we could get a report from engineering regarding some of the other issues that people were having, and I'm wondering if we should table this until we have that report. I'm looking for, I'm not saying, I'm not making that motion right now. I'm asking for what the rest of council thinks. Because this is like changing the zoning, right?
Yes.
To allow for that.
Whether or not there's a concern about water pressure or the sewer line.
So I'm throwing that out there. I don't know what other people think.
Okay. Councillor Garon.
I'm satisfied that staff says there is no problem with the development going through. They've already looked at it, obviously, so I trust that they know what they're doing.
Okay. Further comments? Councillor Cunningham.
Anyone that got a hold of me in the last few days gave some concerns about that, but not one of them was opposed to the project.
Okay. Further comments? Call for the question. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is passed. Next for council's consideration is a report from the city planner, and this is the development permit application, and it's number 14-03. It's for a multifamily development on Graham Avenue. The recommendation is that council issue development permit number 14-03. Moved by Councillor Garon, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Discussion. Call for the question. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is also adopted. We'll move on to the report from the airport manager. Pardon me, the city manager. It's after 10 o'clock. I don't want to.
Could I take that job? Great. I think we already have one, so I'll pass. My report is very short because it's very late. Just wanted to raise the issue that was raised at the in-camera, and council has asked for me to comment. That you'll remember, some will remember back when we had a discussion about the status of a number of publicly held pieces of property in the city's name, and a particular, I think it's fair to say, confusion about the actual title. Staff have done quite a bit of work. We have a thick binder now about the status of a number of properties within Prince Rupert, and we'd like to encourage anyone who is actually keenly interested in this to come and identify themselves to staff, and we'd like to sit down. Either if there's enough people, we'll sit down in an evening and go over this. If not, if there's just a few who can come in and talk directly with the staff members that have put this information together. It's a fascinating historic understanding of property rights that date back to the original grant to the railway in 1911. And given the time, I think that'll be my report for tonight.
Thank you for the briefest report you've managed to give council. We'll move on. Reports, questions, and inquiries from members of council. Are there any? Councillor Cunningham, please go ahead.
Two things. One, I went to that community arts along with Jack on Friday night, and it was an awesome event. And I would like to see the city encourage something like that more often. It was well attended. There was quite a nice display of artwork at it from across the community and that. And I was, even though they asked me to make a speech, I still enjoyed the evening. Now, the second thing is, unfortunately Zeno's left, is I've been approached about a development for a McBride Dental Clinic.
Yes.
And there seems to be a lot of confusion about a development permit for this and the lack of action on it and that. And I just wanted to get staff to look into it and see why it's taken so long, or what the problem is and why, because we've got an empty lot sitting there, and here we are looking at ways of getting more revenue, and evidently this has been going on for 6-7 months for a development permit for it, and all we're doing is collecting taxes on an empty lot when we could possibly be collecting taxes on a nice building.
Certainly. We'll get staff to provide a report.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
I just was driving past the commercial pub, and now that it's burnt on the back end, I'm just wondering if we know if there's any timeline for tearing it down, because it looks really dangerous in the back there, that something could fall on anybody coming in there. So I'm just wondering if staff has any information on that.
Nothing current, but we'll check on that, and I know the fire chief was involved in what the next steps are.
I think they're evaluating the building to see how much asbestos is in there, if there's any, but everybody's aware that it needs to come down sooner rather than later. So I'll give the mayor's report. I attended a special meeting of the Ketchikan Chamber of Commerce and provided an overview of the current economic activity taking place in Prince Rupert and area. The communities of Ketchikan and Saxman are very interested in port projects and marine activities on the Canadian North Coast. I attended the Southeast Conference 2014 Mid-Session Summit held in Juneau, Alaska. Both Prince Rupert and the city of Whitehorse in the Yukon are valued members of the organization, which is made up of community businesses, industry, and state government representatives. Alaskan products are shipped through Prince Rupert and the port facilities. Ferry service, shipping by container, seafood products, other fresh frozen products, lumber and propane, as well as natural gas are all of interest to the Alaskan communities. The City of Prince Rupert has also been selected to host the 2015 Southeast Conference Annual General Meeting in September of that year. The Alaska Marine Highway advised they have a 50-year lease with the Government of Canada for their Fairview Terminal here in Prince Rupert. That starting in 2015, they will commence $11 million worth of upgrades to the facility. Currently, the terminal facility handles over 14,000 passengers, vehicles, commercial trucks, and containers annually. I met with the representative of CBC Radio British Columbia, who advised that the CBC Bureau will be increasing their activity and presence in Prince Rupert and the area. Their number of employees will increase here, back up to their prior complement. And they will also be doing more in-depth local stories, and they are planning to assist in sponsoring and broadcasting some of the various community events. I attended a luncheon hosted by the board chair, the president and CEO, and the Board of Governors of the Northwest Community College. The luncheon was an opportunity to meet with the new president and CEO and talk to some of the Board of Governors that were present. Councillors Carlick Pearson and Garon were also in attendance. As Councillor Cunningham mentioned, I attended the art exhibit hosted by the North Coast Immigrant and Multicultural Services Society, and the exhibit was of artwork produced by the Prince Rupert Community Art Project workshops. The project created interaction between local artists and members of the cultural groups. The event was also held on March 21st, which was the Elimination of Racism Day. And I attended the Northwest Aboriginal Canadian Entrepreneurs Program graduation. This is their second group of graduates, and they provided a nice event for those grads. It's quite an achievement anytime somebody is able to graduate, and there's a lot of mature students there also. And on behalf of the city and city council, I provided a greeting and best wishes from our residents to the graduates. And that concludes the report for this evening. Anything further? I'll ask council for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? This meeting stands adjourned.